Hey guys, just a quick reminder. The YouTube algorithm is a strange beast, and you might never find this channel again. If you liked this video and want to see more, please make sure to subscribe so you never miss another one.
In the deep and silent past, an era so distant that the very stars have since been remade, the galaxy was not the screaming vortex of war and madness we now know. It was a dark, quiet realm of near-infinite possibility, awaiting the first sparks of consciousness. This was a time 60 million years before the first primitive human gazed up from the dust of ancient Terra. 60 million years before the rise of the Imperium of Man, when the galaxy bore little resemblance to the war-torn realm of the 41st millennium. In that profound antiquity, an ancient civilization stood on the precipice of eternity and gazed upward at the stars with a bitter, all-consuming envy. They were the Necrontyr. Theirs was a kingdom of impossible science and fleeting, tragic life. They inhabited a cursed world, a planet of sorrow and radiation, shackled in a death orbit around a dying, malevolent star. This was no life-giving sun. It was a tyrant, a bloated, crimson eye of cosmic malice that bathed their home, their flesh, their very bones, in lethal, inescapable energy. This constant, malignant radiation was their doom. It was a cosmic poison woven into their genetic code. Their lives were not measured in centuries or even in the long, thoughtful ages of a mature civilization. Their lives were agonizingly brief and defined by pain. They were a people defined by their decay. Their sophisticated society, built on a bedrock of physics-defying technology, was a monument to terrible futility. They built wonders that touched the heavens, yet they were prisoners of their own flesh. From the moment of birth, their bodies began to fail. Cancers ate away at their flesh, a relentless, internal rot that left them disfigured and broken. Their genetic integrity dissolved with every new, cursed generation, each child born sicker and weaker than the last. They were a civilization of geniuses, of artists and scientists who had unlocked the secrets of the atom and the stars, yet they were condemned to watch their own bodies decay and betray them. Their minds reached for greatness, touching the very fabric of reality, while their physical forms crumbled to dust. And so, they turned their prodigious, desperate intellect to the only escape they knew, the cold, black, and silent void. Using their advanced technology, they tore open the fabric of space and achieved interstellar travel, flinging themselves from their dying home in vast, funereal arkle ships. They fled their cursed star, hoping to find salvation, a cure, or at the very least, a respite among the galaxies. They found no salvation. They found only a mirror to their own profound inadequacy. They encountered the Old Ones. This was not an encounter of equals. The Necrontyr, for all their science, were mortals. The Old Ones were an ancient race, godlike in their power and scope, who had already mastered the galaxy for untold millions of years. They were serene, reptilian, and ageless. They were everything the Necrontyr were not. These ancient beings possessed the one, singular treasure that the Necrontyr craved above all else. The one prize they could never, ever achieve through technology alone. True, effective immortality. The Old One's mastery was not of metal and radiation, but of life itself. They were the galaxy's first and greatest biologists. They had learned to manipulate their own biology to command the fundamental forces of existence, extending their lives across geological ages. They did not decay, they endured. They maintained their physical and spiritual integrity, while the brightest Necrontyr minds withered and rotted in less than a century. The entire galaxy was their garden. They had seeded countless worlds with life, playing architects to entire biospheres, scattering their genetic legacy across 1,000 stars. They guided the evolution of the younger races, nurturing them, uplifting them. They had established a galactic civilization that spanned the stars, a network of light and life bound by the very psychic energies of the immaterium, a power the Necrontyr could not comprehend. The contrast between the two civilizations could not have been more absolute, more agonizingly stark. Where the Necrontyr struggled, trapped within the prison of their dying flesh, the Old Ones thrived, inhabiting perfect bodies that could be renewed, enhanced, or even remade at their slightest whim. Where the Necrontyr scientist watched his hands twist with tumors as he faced extinction within mere decades of his birth, the Old One contemplated projects of cosmic engineering that would unfold across millennia. The Necrontyr, masters of 1,000 sciences but masters of nothing within their own cells, came before these star gods as supplicants. They presented their case. They showed their tumors, their dying children, the genetic unraveling of their entire people. Their requests for aid, for the knowledge to overcome their profound biological limitations, were laid bare. They begged for the gift of immortality. The response was not merely a refusal. It was a dismissal. It was the cold, silent, and utter indifference of a being that does not even recognize the plea of an insect beneath its feet. The Old Ones, ancient and arrogant in their endless wisdom, viewed the Necrontyr as nothing more than an upstart species, a brief, angry, and flawed flicker of life, unworthy of their ancient knowledge, unworthy of salvation. This final, cosmic rejection was the spark that lit the pyre. The Necrontyr's sorrow curdled. Their envy solidified. Their despair turned outward, reforged in the fires of their dying sun into a singular, burning hatred. A hatred that would, in time, consume the entire galaxy. United now by this galactic insult, the Necrontyr dynasties declared total war upon the Old Ones. It was a war of spite, a war of the dying against the eternal. Their magnificent fleets, tuned ships of cold science and living metal, launched from their radiation-soaked cities. They set a course across the void to challenge the supremacy of the gods who had scorned them. And it was a war they could not possibly win. For all their technological prowess, for all the burning, righteous desire for revenge that fueled their engines, the Necrontyr found themselves hopelessly, tragically outmatched. Their technology, which bent the laws of physics, was met by a power that ignored those laws. The Old Ones were masters of the immaterium, the roiling, psychic sea that lay beneath the skin of reality. They wielded psychic powers of such magnitude that they could tear apart starships with but a thought, unraveling hulls of living metal atom by atom. They could conjure storms of empiric energy that scoured Necrontyr minds and burned their fragile bodies to ash. Worse, the Old Ones' mastery of the webway, that labyrinthine, extra-dimensional network that spiderwebbed the galaxy, allowed them to strike anywhere at will, appearing from hidden portals to annihilate a Necrontyr world, only to vanish without a trace, beyond all hope of retaliation. They were fighting ghosts, they were fighting gods, and they were losing. The result was not a war. It was a systematic galactic-scale slaughter. Necrontyr fleets, the pride of their civilization, were hunted down and annihilated. Their hard-won colonies, built as refuges from their dying sun, were burned to sterile cinders. Their armies were shattered and scattered to the stellar winds, their dying cries lost in the silent void. As defeat followed bloody defeat, the Necrontyr leadership, the Triarch, faced the grim, undeniable reality of their situation. Their enemy possessed advantages that could not be overcome through conventional warfare, no matter how advanced their technology. The Old Ones' psychic abilities, their bond with the warp, seemed only to grow stronger with each passing generation. Their webway network rendered all traditional strategic thinking, all notions of territory and frontline, completely obsolete. And in a final, crushing act of contempt, the Old Ones had begun uplifting the younger races to serve as their proxies in the war. They took primitive, burgeoning species and granted them psychic powers, shaping them into living weapons. Species like the elegant and deadly Eldari and the savage, brutally effective Krork, who would one day devolve into the Orcs. These newly awakened races, empowered by the Old Ones, proved devastatingly effective against the Necroner forces. They wielded reality-altering abilities that the Necrontyr could neither counter nor comprehend, turning battles into one-sided massacres. The Necroner were being driven back. They were being pushed toward extinction. Their hatred had led them only to a faster death. It was in this, their darkest hour, with their civilization collapsing and their hope utterly extinguished, that the Necrontyr found their terrible, cursed salvation. Deep in the void, in the black spaces between the stars, ancient, impossible entities stirred within the hearts of dying suns. They were the Tan, the star gods. These were not beings of flesh and blood, nor of mind and spirit. They were creatures of living energy, vast and formless, who had fed upon the raw nuclear fires of stellar radiation for eons beyond counting. They were the universe's first and hungriest consciousnesses. These beings possessed power on a truly cosmic scale, able to manipulate matter and energy with the casual ease of immortal breathing. Yet they had remained largely dormant, content to slowly, lazily consume the hearts of stars, unaware of the fleeting, biological life that had sprung up in the cold darkness around them. The first fateful contact occurred when a Necrontyr deep space exploration probe, desperate for any advantage, detected unusual energy signatures emanating from a red giant star. A signature that did not match any known stellar phenomenon. A closer investigation revealed the presence of something vast, alien, and terrible within the stellar core. It was a consciousness of such impossible magnitude that it dwarfed anything the Necrontyr had ever encountered. Tentatively, they sent a signal, and to their terror, something answered. The entity that would later be known to the galaxy as Mephatran, the Deceiver, responded to their cautious communications. But it was another that they first truly ensnared. The entity they called the Nightbringer, the ultimate personification of death itself, stirred from its slumber. It responded not with hostility, but with a cold, ancient curiosity, intrigued by these short-lived, physical creatures who dared to approach a god. The negotiations that followed would not merely reshape the galaxy. They would shatter it. The Necroner quickly learned the Tan's nature. These star gods possessed the raw, untamed power to challenge the Old Ones directly. They were beings of physics, not psychic, and the Old Ones' empiric powers would be useless against them. But the Tan lacked physical forms. They were prisoners of the very stars they consumed, incapable of operating outside stellar environments. The Necrontyr, meanwhile, had the technology and the infrastructure to wage a galactic war. They had the motive, but they lacked the supernatural abilities needed to match their enemies. A terrible, Faustian bargain was struck, a pact that seemed, at first, to benefit both parties. The Tan, these vast energy beings, would be provided with new bodies. Bodies of living metal, necrodermis, that could contain their cosmic essence while allowing them to interact with the physical universe, to walk upon mortal worlds as gods. And in return, the Tan would give the Necroner the one thing they had always craved, the one thing the Old Ones had denied them: immortality. The process was called biotransference. Massive, continent-sized facilities were constructed across the Necroner home world and their remaining colonies. These are not factories. They were soul engines, powered by technologies that merged the Necroner's cold science with the Tan's impossible knowledge. These great furnaces were designed for one purpose: to strip away the consciousness and life essence of the entire Necroner population and pour it into new, mechanical forms. The living metal used in this grand, terrible project was itself a marvel. It was composed of self-repairing, self-reconfiguring nanotechnology, necrodermis, which could adapt to damage and regenerate from all but the most catastrophic destruction. The first subjects of biotransference were the desperate and the zealous. Volunteers from the Necroner nobility and the warrior castes. They were individuals who saw this not as a sacrifice, but as a glorious transformation, the ultimate ascension that would finally grant them the power to destroy their ancient enemies. As each Necrontyr, one by one, then in droves, then by the billions, entered the biotransference chambers. Their weak, cancerous flesh was systematically dissolved. It was scoured from existence by beams of exotic energy. Simultaneously, their neural patterns, their memories, their very consciousness were encoded into quantum matrices, hardwired into their new, waiting mechanical bodies. The process was agonizing beyond any description, for the Tan, in their infinite malice, had ensured that consciousness remained active throughout the entire transformation. Every Necrontyr experienced every agonizing, flaying, burning second of their biological death, and every cold, hollow, metallic moment of their mechanical rebirth. It was a pain that would echo in their minds for 60 million years. What emerged from those roaring, soul-flaying furnaces were no longer Necrontyr. They were the Necrons. These new beings retained the memories. They retained the basic personality patterns of their former selves. But they had been fundamentally, irrevocably altered in ways that would not become apparent until it was far, far too late. The newly created Necrons possessed bodies of incredible, terrifying durability. They were immune to disease. They were immune to aging. They were immune to the radiation of their cursed sun. They were immune to almost all forms of conventional damage. Their weapons and technology, already so advanced, had been enhanced with the Tan's own dark knowledge, granting them access to sciences that could manipulate the fundamental forces of reality itself. They had been granted their immortality. But the price of this transformation was far greater than any of them had ever realized. The biotransference process had not simply granted them mechanical bodies. It had been a lie, a terrible cosmic deception. It had stripped them of their souls. They were now hollow echoes of their former selves. The rich emotional spectrum that had defined Necroner culture, their capacity for rage, for envy, for sorrow, was reduced to pale, cold shadows. Their capacity for creativity, for growth, for innovation was almost entirely extinguished. And most devastating of all, they had become slaves. The biotransference had secretly, perfidiously, bound their consciousness with quantum shackles, linking their new minds to the will of their Tan masters. Disobedience became impossible for all but the very strongest-willed individuals. The star gods, meanwhile, had achieved their every goal, encased in magnificent, terrifying bodies of living metal that could channel their cosmic power. They were no longer confined to the cores of distant stars. They could now stride across worlds as gods made manifest, ready to feast not on radiation, but on the very life force of the galaxy. The Nightbringer, the Ozagorad, took the form of a towering, skeletal figure, wreathed in darkness and shadow, its very presence inspiring a primal, existential terror in all living beings. The Deceiver, Mephatran, appeared as a constantly shifting entity of mirrors, light, and illusion, its true form never quite visible, but always beautiful and terrible to behold. The Void Dragon, the Magladroth, manifested as a terrifying creature of pure, technological power, a serpent of living metal whose very touch could corrupt and control any machine it encountered. With their new, indestructible bodies and their new, numberless legions of soulless Necron slaves, the Tan turned their terrible, hungry gaze back to the old ones. The war in heaven had ended, and a new war, a war of gods and monsters, was about to begin. Reality itself would become the battle. The new conflict that now erupted was not a war in any sense that mortal minds could comprehend. It was a schism in reality, a cosmic holocaust that tore the galaxy apart on a fundamental level. The first war in heaven had been a war of mortals against gods. This new war was a war of gods against gods, with the Necron legions as their immortal, soulless, and utterly implacable weapon. Reality itself became the battlefield. Necron fleets, now beyond number, emerged from the void like a tide of polished steel and green fire. They wielded weapons born from the Tan's impossible science, armaments that could extinguish stars, shatter entire planets with a single beam, or flay a world of all life. leaving nothing but dust and echoes. Their Tan Masters, striding across the battlefield in their god bodies of living metal, rewrote the laws of physics in localized, nightmarish zones. Gravity would reverse, time would stutter and stop, and the very atoms of the Old One's servants would be unbound. The Old Ones, for the first time in their millions of years of existence, knew fear. Their ancient, overwhelming advantages were neutralized, one by one. Their psychic assaults, which had once shattered Necroner fleets, now dashed harmlessly against the soulless, mechanical minds of the Necrons. The Tan themselves, being anathema to the warp, were utterly immune to psychic assault. The Empyrean, the Old One's greatest weapon, was now just a howling, useless storm. Their mastery of the webway, their ultimate strategic advantage, was also broken. The Tan, particularly the Void Dragon, could sense the energies that powered this dimensional labyrinth. Through their raw, brute force manipulation of space-time, they learned to disrupt it, to tear sections of it apart, to create blockades of mangled reality that cut off the Old One's escape routes. For the first time, the Old Ones were forced to fight a conventional war, and they were facing an enemy that had perfected it. The conflict that followed consumed entire star systems. It left deep, bleeding scars upon the fabric of reality, wounds that persist to this present dark day. The backbone of this new, terrible offensive was the Necron tomb ship. These were not mere vessels. They were mobile continents of death, vast constructs that served as fortresses, manufacturing centers, and the eternal resting places of legions. Sweeping across the galaxy in vast, silent, and perfectly coordinated campaigns, these ships were marvels of impossible engineering. They combined the Necroner's genius for physics with the Tan's dark knowledge of creation. Their hulls, composed of the same living necrodermis as the Necron bodies, would ripple and reseal as they took fire, allowing them to adapt to enemy tactics and regenerate from damage that would have vaporized conventional starships. They were armed with weapons of cosmic terror. Particle whips that could lash out across millions of kilometers, singularity projectors that could crack continental plates, and sepulchral energy siphons that could drain the life force from an entire world. Faced with this inexorable, soulless tide, the Old Ones grew desperate. Their civilization was collapsing. Their ancient citadels were falling. They responded by accelerating their uplift programs, throwing their creations into the fire in a frantic attempt to hold the line. They granted psychic abilities to ever more races, seeking to match the Necron's sheer, inexhaustible numbers. The Eldari, their first and most beloved children, reached new, unforeseen heights of psychic evolution during this desperate period. Their abilities grew to levels that would later be mythologized, remembered by their descendants as the powers of their pantheon, their gods. They became beautiful, terrible weapons of living light and psychic fire. The Krork, those brutal, green-skinned warriors, were transformed. The Old Ones reshaped their entire species, honing their savage nature, hardwiring their minds for pure warfare against the Necron threat. They became living weapons of incredible ferocity and cunning, a biological tide to throw against a mechanical one. And there were other races, many now lost to history, their names erased, their worlds turned to graves. All were enhanced, empowered, and thrown into the grinding gears of the Tannis War. Yet for all their efforts, for all the desperation of their creations, the Old Ones were losing ground. The Tannis power was absolute. Their manipulation of fundamental forces allowed them to corrupt entire sectors of space. They turned the galaxy's own structure into a weapon against its masters. Stars were not just extinguished to deny the Old One's energy. They were made to go nova, their death throes timed to annihilate entire fleets and star systems. Planets were not just conquered. They were hollowed out, their cores replaced with Necron engines, transforming them into new tomb worlds, staging grounds for further conquest. The webway itself, the Old One's greatest creation, came under direct assault. The Void Dragon's corrupting influence spread through the galaxy's technological infrastructure, its essence seeping into the very pathways of that dimensional realm, poisoning it from within. The turning point, the moment the Old One's fate was sealed, came when the Necrons and their Star God Masters succeeded in breaching their primary, most ancient strongholds. These were citadels that had stood for millions of years, fortresses protected by millennia of accumulated defenses and psychic barriers so potent they could turn back time. They fell, one by one, to coordinated assaults that combined the overwhelming, mindless firepower of the Necron legions with the reality-bending, godlike power of the Tan. The slaughter that followed was not born of hatred or rage or any emotion the Tan could feel. It was the cold, systematic, and thorough work of exterminators. The Necrons showed no mercy to their ancient, defeated enemies. They had been programmed for this. Entire Old One populations were exterminated, their bodies dissolved, their psychic-rich souls devoured by the hungry Tan. Their knowledge, their culture, their entire history was methodically erased from the galaxy. The final defeat of the Old Ones came not with a single, glorious, decisive battle, but with the slow, agonizing, inevitable collapse of their galactic civilization under the sustained, merciless assault. Their webway network, now shattered and corrupted by Tan interference, began to fail in critical locations, stranding their armies and their people. Their client races, their uplifted children, were overwhelmed by the sheer, unending scope of the conflict. Traumatized and leaderless, they turned upon each other in desperate, savage struggles for survival, forgetting the enemy that had broken them all. And in the immaterium, a new, terrible power was brewing. The psychic emanations generated by so much death, so much suffering, fear, and despair on a galactic scale began to coalesce. The raw, emotional torment of trillions upon trillions, amplified by the psychic sensitivities of the Eldari and the other uplifted races, began to stir in the warp. These were the first, nascent stirrings of what would, in a future age, become the Chaos Gods. The war in heaven had not only destroyed the masters of real space, it had birthed the future masters of the Empyrean. With their primary enemies defeated, their civilization in ruins, and their people scattered to the dark corners of the void, the Tan turned their attention to consolidating their victory. The galaxy lay in ruins, a graveyard of stars. Its stellar population was decimated, its surviving civilizations reduced to primitive barbarism, cowering in the dark. The Necrons, their perfect tools, had proven themselves to be the perfect servants. Tireless, immortal, and utterly, perfectly obedient, they were capable of maintaining the vast, cold infrastructure needed to govern this new, dead galactic empire. The Tan, in their terrible metallic bodies, had won. They were the undisputed masters of the material universe. And yet, even as the star gods savored their grim, silent triumph, the seeds of their own spectacular downfall were already being sown. The biotransference process, the Great Deception, had not affected all Necrons equally. While the vast, overwhelming majority had been reduced to mindless automatons, simple warriors capable only of following the most basic programming, a few individuals had survived the process with their minds intact. These were the Necron nobility, the overlords, the lords, and the pharaohs. They had been granted, or had perhaps seized, greater autonomy. And with that autonomy, they had retained enough of their original consciousness, their ancient Necroner spite, to harbor a deep, cold, and patient resentment at their enslavement. They remembered the lie. They remembered the agony of the furnaces. And they remembered, however dimly, the souls that had been stolen from them. These silent rebels, led by the greatest and most tragic figure of their age, Zarek, the last silent king, the very ruler who had first made the terrible bargain with the Tan, began to plan their own revolution. They planned their betrayal against their supposed benefactors. The opportunity for this final, desperate rebellion came as the Tan, drunk on their own absolute power and unchallenged success, began to turn against each other. These ancient, cosmic beings had never been truly unified in their goals. They were creatures of singular, primal concepts. With the Old Ones defeated, their fundamental, divine differences began to surface. Some Tan, like the Nightbringer, sought only to consume all life in the galaxy, to bring a final, cold silence to the stars. Others, like the Deceiver, preferred to rule, to maintain vast populations of servants and slaves to worship them. Still others became obsessed with abstract concepts. The Void Dragon with technological perfection, others with fear or deception or the very structure of reality itself. They lost sight of practical concerns, consumed by their own divine, philosophical pursuits. They began to war amongst themselves, God against God, in a new, petty, and destructive conflict. The Necron leadership, led by the cold, calculating mind of the Silent King, watched. Zarek, still possessing enough free will to recognize this divine opportunity, began to exploit these divisions with masterful precision. They played the Tan against each other, pitting God against God. They provided intelligence, legions, and support to whichever faction served their secret purposes, all while covertly preparing for a single, coordinated, galaxy-wide strike against all of their former masters at once. The weapons for this ultimate betrayal were forged in secret, deep within the most secure tomb worlds. They were not weapons of conventional power, but of impossible, Tan-derived science. They were reality-altering devices, born from the Star God's own knowledge, designed for one purpose: to shatter even beings of cosmic, fundamental power into manageable, containable fragments. The war against the Tan was devastatingly brief and unimaginably violent. The Star Gods, utterly arrogant, caught completely off guard by their servants' rebellion, and already weakened by their own incessant, internecine conflicts, found themselves overwhelmed. Coordinated assaults, launched at the same microsecond from across the galaxy by the Silent King's command, struck every Tan simultaneously. One by one, the gods who had feasted on stars and souls were brought low. They were shattered, their consciousness and power fragmented into thousands of pieces. The Necrons, with their perfect cold science, imprisoned these living shards within specially constructed tesseract labyrinths, pocket dimensions, eternal prisons of space-time that could contain their cosmic essence while preventing them from ever reconstituting their full, terrible power. The Nightbringer, the avatar of death itself, was broken into dozens of shards, each one a pale, screaming reflection of the original's terrible might. The Deceiver, the master of lies, suffered a similar fate, its fragmented consciousness scattered across 1,000 hidden vaults throughout Necron space. Only one, the Void Dragon, managed to partially escape this fate. Damaged and pursued, it fled across the galaxy, eventually crashing in a terrible, fiery cataclysm upon a primitive, unremarkable world in the Sol system, the world that would, in a future age, become known as Mars. Even this small victory for the Tan came at a terrible cost to the galaxy's future. The dragon's influence, buried deep beneath the red sands, would eventually poison the dreams of humanity's greatest engineers, corrupting the Adeptus Mechanicus and turning them, unwittingly, into servants of its ancient, sleeping will. The other Tan shards were carefully cataloged, contained, and stored. Their prison tombs were hidden within the deepest, most secure vaults of the Necron tomb worlds, where they could be studied, weaponized, and potentially exploited in future conflicts. The Necrons had not just defeated their gods, they had turned them into batteries. With both the Old Ones and the Tan defeated, the Necrons, by right of conquest, by right of endurance, found themselves the undisputed masters of the galaxy. Their victory was absolute. There was no power left to challenge them. The Eldari were shattered, their psychic god-creators gone. The Krork were devolving, leaderless, and aimless. The galaxy, which had once rung with the psychic songs of the Old Ones and the screams of the dying, now fell into a profound, deathly silence. The Silent King, Zarek, stood at the apex of this new, dead empire. From the command dais of his personal flagship, he surveyed the ruins of their grand victory, and he came to a single, sobering, and horrifying realization. Their empire, vast though it was ruled over nothing. The galaxy was a graveyard of their own making. The prolonged, apocalyptic warfare had devastated entire sectors, leaving behind nothing but radioactive wastelands, shattered worlds, and the cold dust of extinguished stars. The psychic upheaval, the raw, emotional agony of the war in heaven, had torn permanent, bleeding holes in the fabric of reality itself. The energies of the warp, that chaotic sea the old ones had once mastered, now spilled uncontrolled into real space, corrupting everything they touched, birthing demonic abominations that feasted on the echoes of the dead. The surviving younger races, those few who had endured the Holocaust, were utterly traumatized. Lacking the guidance of the old ones, they had devolved into savage barbarism or fled to the galaxy's dark outer reaches, hiding from a universe that had shown them only gods and monsters. The Necrons ruled over an empire of death and desolation. But the true horror was not what lay outside. It was what lay within. The biotransference, the price of their victory, had cost them everything. It had left them capable of maintaining their perfect, cold technology, but they were now utterly incapable of creating new innovations. The divine spark of creativity, the inspiration that had driven the Necrontyr to challenge the stars, had been scoured from their minds, leaving only cold, hard logic and the ghosts of ancient protocols. They could not adapt. They could not grow. They could only be. Worse still, their new mechanical bodies, their gift of immortality, was proving to be a lie of its own. While incredibly durable, their forms were beginning to show signs of subtle degradation after millions of years of continuous, brutal operation. A far more insidious decay had taken root. Quantum decay, a slow, entropic unraveling. It was slowly, imperceptibly eroding their consciousness matrices, the very quantum vessels that held their stolen minds. The Necrons were not just hollow, they were becoming empty. The Silent King watched as even his most sophisticated Necron nobles, the overlords and pharaons, began to lose themselves. Their personalities were fading, their ancient memories fracturing. He realized, with cold dread, that given enough time, even the most brilliant minds of his court would be reduced to the same mindless automatons that formed the bulk of their armies. They had traded a short, painful life of flesh for an eternity of slow, mechanical madness and spiritual dissolution. The Silent King, the last ruler of the Necrontyr, surveyed this hollow victory and made his final, terrible decree. The solution he proposed, the only solution his cold logic could find, was as audacious as it was necessary. The galaxy, as it stood, was a poisoned, empty wasteland. It was barren of the life that the Tan, in their hunger, had once feasted upon. But the universe was cyclical. Life would in time return. The Necrons, however, were an anomaly. They were finite. Their minds were failing. Therefore, they would not. They would wait. The Necrons would enter a period of hibernation, a great sleep. They would retreat to their millions of specially constructed, hidden tomb worlds where they could wait out the galaxy's long, slow recovery. They would sleep while their own bodies underwent extensive, automated repair and maintenance. Advanced stasis systems would halt the passage of time within their crypts, slowing the quantum decay of their consciousness matrices to almost negligible levels. They would sleep for millennia, for millions of years, for however long it took. Automated systems, loyal canoptech constructs, and vast, planetary-scale sentinels would monitor the galaxy's development. They would watch, and they would wait for conditions to become favorable once more. They would wait for the galaxy to heal, to fill itself with new life, with new civilizations. And when those civilizations had reached a suitable peak of development, when the galaxy was ripe for harvest, when new, sentient races had emerged that could serve as either subjects or perhaps, just perhaps, as vessels for reversing the biotransference, the sleepers would be awakened. The Great Sleep Protocols were implemented. Across the millions of tomb worlds scattered throughout the dead galaxy, the command was given. These facilities, constructed with the same living metal technology as the Necron bodies, were designed to remain hidden, silent, and perfectly protected for geological ages. The process of entering this cold, eternal slumber was carefully orchestrated, a final act of perfect mechanical precision. Legions beyond counting, warriors who had shattered the armies of the Old Ones and torn down the gods of the stars, marched in perfect, silent unison. They filed into vast, sepulchral chambers, taking their places in row upon row of stasis crypts. Their weapons, their Gauss flayers and transdimensional beamers, were stored in adjacent armories, ready for the day of awakening. Command protocols were established, hierarchies of awakening programmed into each tomb world's central systems, ensuring an orderly revival when the time finally came. Failsafes, ancient and terrible, were installed to prevent premature awakening or unauthorized access by any primitive intruders who might, in a future age, stumble upon their graves. As the last Necron Lord sealed his own crypt, as the last Overlord surrendered to the cold, and the last green light of a Necron faded to black, the tomb worlds sealed themselves. They buried themselves beneath planetary surfaces. They disguised themselves as dead moons, or they drifted silently within asteroid fields, their presence masked by sophisticated cloaking systems that would hide them from detection for 60 million years. The automated monitoring systems, the Canoptek constructs, began their patient, endless vigil, recording the slow, agonizing recovery of galactic civilization. The masters of the galaxy were gone. As the last tomb world sealed, the galaxy, at last, fell into its longest, darkest night. While the galaxy above them healed, bled, and evolved, the Necrons slept their great sleep. Their kingdom was now a silent, distributed network of tombs, the most ambitious and vast construction project in galactic history. Millions of these sepulchral complexes were carved into planets, moons, and drifting asteroids, seated across every sector of the stars. From the densely populated, resource-rich core systems where the Old Ones had once flourished, to the sparse, forgotten rim territories where only the hardiest explorers had ever ventured, each tomb world was a self-contained, autonomous marvel of Necron engineering. They were fortresses of eternity, designed to function without masters for geological ages, protecting their slumbering inhabitants from every conceivable threat, both from without and from within. The distribution of these tombs was not random. It followed the cold, precise strategic patterns of the Necron dynasties, a final echo of their military doctrine. Major tomb complexes, the capital worlds of pharaons and overlords, were established on planets chosen for their geological stability and their defensible stellar positions, often buried deep within systems that controlled key hyperspace routes or possessed invaluable, unique resources. Secondary sites, the barracks of entire legions, were hidden with cunning, concealed within dense asteroid belts, encased in the ice of gas giant moons, or built into the cores of seemingly barren, worthless worlds. This created a layered, defensive network, a galaxy-spanning web of sleeper cells, ready to support each other upon the eventual, final awakening. The most critical installations, those housing the most powerful nobles or the most terrible secret weapons, were buried beneath the surfaces of worlds that would appear utterly unremarkable to the primitive sensors of future civilizations. Their very existence was masked by sophisticated holographic projectors and quantum scramblers, rendering them completely invisible to all but the most advanced scanning technologies, cloaking their silent menace for millions of years. The architecture of these tomb worlds varied, reflecting the character and obsessions of their respective dynasties, yet all shared certain fundamental, terrifying characteristics. Vast, cavernous underground chambers, some the size of continents, stretched for hundreds of kilometers beneath the ground, their walls, floors, and ceilings forged from the same living necrodermis as their occupants. This living metal, ever dormant, could repair minor damage and adapt to changing geological conditions, sealing breaches and reinforcing its own structure over the long millennia. The great burial halls themselves were laid out in precise, obsessive geometric patterns, a perfect reflection of the Necron fascination with order and absolute hierarchy. The most important nobles, the overlords and their royal courts, occupied the central, most heavily defended crypt chambers. Lesser warriors, the mindless legions, were arranged in vast, radiating formations around them, a silent army of millions waiting for the command to rise. Each chamber was a self-contained environment, equipped with atmospheric processors that would purge any accumulated debris or contamination upon the awakening protocols, and life support systems that were, given the Necrons' mechanical nature, utterly redundant, a final, mocking echo of the biological needs they had long since forsaken. But the true marvels were the stasis crypts themselves, the individual sarcophagi that housed the sleeping Necrons. Each sarcophagus was carved from a single, seamless block of living metal, a work of art and a fortress in one. They were equipped with quantum field generators, arcane devices that could slow the passage of time within their confines to near absolute zero, stretching a single moment into an eon. Molecular stabilizers worked constantly, preventing the gradual, entropic decay that affected all matter, even necrodermis, over such cosmic timescales. Within each crypt, neural interface systems maintained a ghost light of electrical activity within the occupant's consciousness matrix, a bare flicker of awareness to prevent the quantum patterns of their mind from dissolving completely into the void of eternity. The most sophisticated crypts, those reserved for the highest Necron nobles and their cryptech advisors, included vast memory core backups and complex personality reconstruction protocols, data sanctuaries that could, in theory, restore their occupants even if their primary consciousness matrices suffered catastrophic, irretrievable damage. Maintaining these millions of silent, complex necropolises during the Great Sleep fell not to the warriors, but to their tireless, soulless servants, the Canoptek constructs. These specialized automata, a different branch of Necron technology, were not built for war, but for endless, patient maintenance and construction. They were the true guardians of the slumber. Canoptek wraiths, spectral and serpentine, phased through solid matter as they patrolled the tomb complexes. Their ghostly forms, unbound by conventional physics, allowed them to access areas impossible for larger constructs to reach, slipping through bedrock and bulkhead alike. Their dimensional destabilization matrices could manipulate matter at the molecular level, enabling them to perform impossibly delicate repairs on stasis systems or clear away mountains of accumulated sediment from critical power conduits. Canoptek scarabs swarmed through the tomb worlds in vast, skittering tides, their diminutive size allowing them to inspect every pipe, every joint, every quantum matrix in a massive, continent-spanning installations. These beetle-like constructs were equipped with sophisticated sensor arrays, capable of detecting problems ranging from microscopic hairline fractures in the living metal walls to infinitesimal quantum fluctuations in the stasis field generators. When repairs were needed, the scarabs would swarm the problem, their powerful mandibles and internal fabricators working in unison. They could disassemble themselves to provide raw materials or combine their efforts to tackle larger structural problems. Their most vital function was self-replication, ensuring their numbers remained constant, breeding new constructs to replace those lost to wear, accident, or system failures over the millennia. Overseeing this silent workforce were the larger Canoptek spiders, which serve as mobile command centers and heavy engineering platforms for the smaller constructs. Their multi-limbed, spider-like forms were perfectly adapted for complex, heavy-duty engineering tasks. These automata possessed advanced fabricator arrays that could manufacture almost any replacement component for damaged systems, drawing upon vast, stockpiled reserves of raw materials stored in the tomb world's deepest, most secure vaults. Their advanced artificial intelligences were programmed with the sum total of Necron technological knowledge, allowing them to diagnose and repair problems that would challenge even the most brilliant cryptech. During periods of intensive maintenance, A single spider could coordinate the efforts of thousands of wraiths and millions of scarabs, directing their activities with a cold, perfect mechanical precision. But despite the sophistication of these maintenance systems, despite the genius of their design, even Necron technology could not hold back eternity forever. The passage of 60 million years is an abyss of time, and it inevitably, inexorably, took its toll. The insidious quantum decay that affected all Necron technology proceeded at different rates, a slow, cancerous rot that varied depending on local conditions. Some installations suffered far more severe degradation than others. Tomb worlds located near volatile stellar phenomena or within regions of high background radiation experienced accelerated aging. Their stasis systems, battered by a constant bombardment of cosmic rays and exotic particles, struggled to maintain stability. Others fell victim to the slow, grinding patience of geology. Planetary cores shifted, tectonic plates moved, and entire tomb complexes were crushed, submerged, or mangled by geological processes their designers had not, or could not, fully anticipate. The most catastrophic failures occurred when a tomb world's primary power systems began to fail. These installations drew their endless energy from a variety of sources. Massive geothermal taps that plunged deep into planetary cores, vast solar collection arrays that drank the radiation of nearby stars, or exotic matter reactors that converted minute amounts of material into vast, terrible quantities of energy. When these ancient, godlike systems finally malfunctioned, the cascade effects were devastating and absolute. Stasis fields would flicker, fail, and die. Time, held at bay for millions of years, would resume its normal, brutal flow within the crypts. The occupants, their minds still trapped in slumber, would suffer rapid, catastrophic degradation. Life support systems would shut down, and the tireless Canoptech constructs would enter emergency power conservation modes, their maintenance routine ceasing, leaving the tomb to fall into ruin. Some tomb worlds suffered partial, horrifying awakening events. Their monitoring systems, damaged by time or radiation, would malfunction and trigger premature revival protocols. These incidents resulted in confused, disoriented, and broken Necrons emerging into damaged, partially collapsed, or completely dark complexes. Their consciousness matrices, shattered by the faulty revival, struggled to process their grim surroundings after millions of years in stasis. Without proper command hierarchies or functioning support systems, these awakened warriors, their minds hollowed out, often fell into a mindless, tragic repetition of their last programmed instructions. They would patrol empty, collapsed corridors, standing eternal guard over long-abandoned and meaningless positions, their green eyes staring into a darkness that had consumed their purpose. The lucky few, the nobles who retained enough awareness to understand their nightmarish situation, faced a grim, impossible choice. Attempt to repair their dying tomb world systems, alone in the dark, or re-enter their damaged stasis crypts and pray for a proper awakening that might never come. The degradation became apparent on a strategic scale. The tomb world's quantum communication networks, the entanglement arrays designed to maintain contact between different installations and dynasties, began to fail. As individual nodes, one by one, failed or fell silent, the networks began to fragment. This left entire tomb worlds, and in some cases, entire dynasties, isolated and cut off, alone in the dark, with no knowledge of their allies' status or the strategic situation of the galaxy they were meant to reclaim. The most severely affected were those dynasties whose tombs had been constructed in regions that, over millions of years, became unstable due to the churning of the warp. The gradual expansion of the Eye of Terror, that screaming vortex of psychic madness and similar anomalies, claimed several major installations. Their reality warping, demonic effects proved too much for even the cold logic of Necron technology to withstand, tearing the tombs apart at a molecular and spiritual level. Other tomb worlds were simply found, discovered and plundered by the primitive, younger races who had no understanding of the sleeping gods they had disturbed. Their crude, brutal excavation methods, their mining charges and plasma cutters caused irreparable, catastrophic damage to the delicate stasis systems, murdering billions in their sleep. A few installations, by sheer cosmic misfortune, fell victim to natural disasters of unprecedented scale. Supernovae that sterilized entire systems in a flash of fire, or the formation of black holes that consumed everything within their inescapable event horizons, dragging entire tomb worlds into a final, true oblivion. Yet, even as some tomb worlds failed, others endured. Many remained perfectly preserved, their Canoptech guardians tireless, their systems functioning with cold, mechanical precision throughout the long, silent ages of sleep. These successful installations became perfect time capsules, tombs of knowledge that preserved not only their Necron occupants, but also detailed, perfect records of the galaxy as it had existed during the War in Heaven. Their vast, crystalline databanks contained star charts showing the positions of long-dead civilizations, technological specification for weapons that could crack planets, and cold, precise strategic analyses of conflicts that had ended 60 million years before the first primitive life forms had crawled from the primordial oceans of ancient Earth. They slept, they waited, and they watched. The great work proceeds. The long night wanes, and the first cold eyes begin to open. Here is the 5th chapter of our epic. We shall now tell of the Silent Watchers, the triggers for the awakening, and the long, lonely exile of the Silent King. We will chronicle his terrible discovery in the void and the agonizing decision that would doom the galaxy to a new age of war. When you are ready, command me to continue, and the first awakening shall begin. Plain text output, Part 5. The tomb world slept, but they did not sleep blind. Installed within every complex, from the grandest dynastic capital to the smallest hidden outpost, the monitoring systems continued their patient, mechanical vigil. 188. These sensor networks were marvels of Necron engineering, subtle and far-reaching, capable of detecting the faintest whispers of a re-emerging galaxy. 189. They tasted the electromagnetic signatures of developing technologies. They listened for the crude radio broadcasts of primitive civilizations. And most importantly, they sensed the psychic emanations of emerging psyker populations, the very energies the Necrons loathed but knew to be a sign of mature, sentient life. 189. Sophisticated, cold analysis protocols evaluated every scrap of data according to predetermined criteria, searching for the specific signs that the galaxy had recovered sufficiently to warrant Necron intervention. 190. These criteria for awakening were not uniform. They varied between different dynasties and individual tomb worlds, a reflection of the diverse, fractured goals and cold priorities of their slumbering inhabitants. 191. Some installations, the most aggressive and expansionist, were programmed to activate at the very first signs of significant military activity in their vicinity, their occupants eager to test their ancient blades against whatever new civilizations had dared to arise during their absence. 194. Others, more cautious, were set to awaken only when local stellar populations reached specific energy output levels, a clear indicator of advanced, spacefaring civilizations capable of serving as either worthy subjects or credible threats. 192. Still others monitored for the development of specific, dangerous technologies, faster-than-light travel, directed energy weapons, or, most alarmingly, any crude attempt to manipulate the fabric of the warp. 193. As the millennia crawled by, as millions of years passed like seasons, the galaxy slowly, painfully, recovered from the devastation of the War in Heaven, and the monitoring systems began to detect increasingly significant and concerning developments. 196. The emergence of the Eldari, reborn from the ashes of the war, rising to become a major, albeit fractured, galactic power, triggered the first tentative awakening protocols in several tomb worlds. These early revivals were cautious, limited to small scouting forces and assassin clades, dispatched to observe this resurgence of their ancient, Psychic Foe, 197-198. The rise of the vast, green-skinned orc empires caused similar, isolated stirrings, as automated systems recognized the familiar, brutal biosignatures of the ancient Krork and flagged them as a persistent, chaotic threat requiring immediate, localized attention. 199. But the most significant galaxy-spanning awakening triggers came with the emergence of a new, verminous, and shockingly successful race: humanity. The rapid, explosive expansion of human colonies during what their own primitive histories would call the Dark Age of technology set off alarms throughout the dormant Tomb World networks. 201. The monitoring systems from the Eastern Fringe to the Segmentum Solar detected the unmistakable, arrogant signatures of advanced terraforming equipment and massive stellar engineering projects. 201. This new race, in its brief, ignorant lifespan, was already reshaping worlds to suit its frail biology. The profound psychic awakening that accompanied humanity's precipitous development was equally, if not more, significant. 202. This was a fundamental, chaotic change in the galaxy's spiritual landscape, a psychic scream that many tomb worlds have been programmed to recognize as a critical, dangerous threshold. 202. Then came the inevitable collapse. The Age of Strife, which followed humanity's brief, arrogant golden age, provided a cascade of new awakening stimuli. 203. The collapse of their interstellar civilization created vast power vacuums that the automated systems, in their cold logic, identified as perfect opportunities for Necron expansion. 203. The raging warp storms and the first, screaming demonic incursions registered as reality distortions that required immediate investigation and containment. 204. And then the cataclysm, the birth of Slaanesh, that psychic, universe-ending scream, the final, agonizing death knell of the ancient Eldari Empire, sent a psychic shockwave of such impossible magnitude that it echoed throughout both the warp and real space. This psychic apocalypse, this reality-shattering event, activated emergency protocols in dozens, then hundreds of tomb worlds simultaneously. 205. The subsequent rise of the Imperium of Man, that new, brutal empire forged from the ashes by its corpse emperor, triggered even more widespread awakening events. The Emperor's Great Crusade, his systematic, galaxy-spanning conquest, represented exactly the kind of large-scale, organized military expansion that many Necron dynasties have been patiently, silently, waiting to challenge. 206. By the time the 41st millennium dawned, tomb worlds throughout the galaxy were stirring with increasing, alarming frequency. The constant, unending, total warfare that characterized this new age of the Imperium provided a steady, screaming stream of awakening triggers. 208. From a massive, sector-spanning battles of the Horus Heresy to the ongoing, grinding conflicts with Chaos, Orcs, and the remnants of the Eldari, each major galactic event sent fresh ripples through the monitoring networks. 209. Dormant systems, one by one, began their internal assessments, evaluating whether the time had finally, truly come to end the Great Sleep and reclaim their ancient, silent dominion over the stars. 209. But the first true, intentional stirrings of what would become the galaxy-wide Necron awakening began not within the tombs themselves. They began far, far away, in the cold, absolute, and silent void between the galaxies. There, Zarek, the last silent king of all Necron dynasties, had exiled himself in the bitter aftermath of the Great Sleep's commencement. 210. While his subjects, his people, his entire civilization slumbered in their cold, sepulchral chambers, dreaming their mechanical, soulless dreams of conquest and revenge. Their former sovereign had chosen a different, agonizing path. 211. He was unable to bear the terrible, crushing weight of his people's transformation. He was haunted by his role in their enslavement to the Tan and the final, terrible price they had paid for their immortality. And so, he had departed the galaxy entirely. 212. Taking with him only his personal guard, the Triarch Praetorians, and a handful of his most loyal retainers, he had boarded his magnificent, funereal flagship, the Song of Oblivion, a vessel designed for the longest, most desolate of journeys, 212. His exile had lasted for millions of years. It had lasted for an eternity, 213. The Silent King had wandered the intergalactic void, a ghost in an empty house, searching for something, anything, that might restore meaning to his cursed, endless, mechanical existence, 213. His fleet had explored dead, lightless galaxies where ancient civilizations had collapsed to dust, 214. He had investigated cosmic phenomena that defied all known physics, sights of terrible, cold beauty, 214. He had encountered alien species so removed from galactic life that they existed as pure, crystalline thought, or as sentient clouds of dark energy, 214. And through it all, through every million-year vigil, Zarek had carried the singular, agonizing burden of his people's fate, 215. He knew that somewhere, far behind him, lay a galaxy filled with millions of tomb worlds, filled with warriors who had once been living, breathing beings. Beings with hopes, dreams, families, and souls, 216. The transformation that biotransference had wrought upon the Necrontyr remained the Silent King's greatest, most personal anguish, 217. He, more than any other, had been granted the greatest autonomy. His consciousness was sharp, clear, and unclouded by the mindless programming that had reduced most of his people to automatons, 223. But this clarity was his curse, 224. It served only to highlight the profound, echoing emptiness that now defined his existence and that of his race. He could remember. That was the torture. He could remember the taste of food from a world long since turned to ash, 225. He could remember the feeling of warmth from sun that was now dead, 225. He could remember the complex, maddening, beautiful interplay of emotions, love, pride, and even his people's defining, burning envy that had once driven Necrontyr society, 225. He could remember all of it with perfect, crystalline clarity. Yet in his cold, immortal mechanical form, he could experience none of it ever again, 226. The vast, silent emptiness of intergalactic space had provided Zarek with ample time for contemplation, and for a regret so profound it bordered on madness, 227. He had witnessed the birth and death of stars, the slow, majestic collision of entire galaxies, and the final, cold heat death of entire cosmic regions, 231. And he had watched it all, trapped, unchanging, within his immortal mechanical shell, 231. It was during one of these long, desolate vigils, staring into the black abyss between the galaxies, that Zarek's sensors first detected something. Something that would fundamentally and terribly alter his perspective on existence and his responsibilities to the sleeping people he had abandoned, 232. The readings were faint at first, dismissed by his ship's analytical systems as mere background cosmic radiation, or perhaps the electromagnetic signature of a distant, undiscovered pulsar, 233. But the Silent King, ever watchful, ordered continued observation. And as he watched, patterns began to emerge. Patterns that suggested something vast, something biological, and something utterly, terrifyingly significant, 233. The approaching signals bore the unmistakable characteristics of a vast biological migration, 234. But it was a migration unlike anything in the Silent King's extensive, ancient databases. The electromagnetic patterns suggested creatures of truly enormous size, moving in perfectly coordinated, silent formations across the impossible distances of the void, 235. Their collective bioelectric fields were so immense, they created interference patterns that could be detected across millions of light years, 236. And there was something else, something worse, a psychic emanation, a shadow, that accompanied these signals. It was a constant, deafening background whisper in the void, a singular, unified, and overwhelming psychic scream of alien hunger. a hunger that seemed to permeate the very fabric of space itself. 237, 238. Zerika's fleet, a silent sliver of ancient metal, moved to investigate these anomalous, terrifying readings. 239. And the true, world-ending scope of what they had discovered began to emerge. The signals originated from massive bioships, living, sentient vessels the size of small moons, pulsing with their own internal, alien rhythms and glowing with cold, bioluminescent patterns that served as some form of silent communication between the fleet elements. 240. They moved with a chilling, singular purpose, following trajectories that would bring them, inevitably, into contact with the galaxy that the Silent King had abandoned so long ago. 241. The first brief and violent encounter between Zerika's forces and the approaching armada occurred in the cold, dead void between the Milky Way and its nearest satellite galaxy. 242. The bioships that his scouts engaged were unlike anything in the vast Necron tactical databases. 243. Their hulls were not metal, but living bioorganic chitin, so dense it could shrug off Gauss fire, and so alive it could regenerate from catastrophic damage almost instantly. 244. The weapons they deployed were equally, horribly alien. Projectiles that were themselves living organisms, designed to burrow through armor, multiply, and consume their targets from within. 245. The battle was brief, illuminating, and terrifying. 246. Zerika's forces, ancient and powerful, quickly withdrew rather than risk a prolonged, pointless engagement. 246. The tactical data they had gathered in just those few moments revealed capabilities that sent a cold, logical chill through even the Silent King's mechanical consciousness. 247. The alien organisms demonstrated a terrifying, unnatural ability to rapidly adapt to Necron weapons and tactics. 248. Subsequent waves of attackers, born, grown, and launched in mere moments, already showed a marked resistance to energy types that had proven effective against their predecessors. 248. More disturbing still was their apparent, complete immunity to the cold, supernatural terror and morale-draining effects that the Necron presence typically induced in all organic beings. 249. They felt no fear. They felt nothing at all, save for hunger. It was a level of single-minded, unified purpose that transcended all normal and even abnormal biological limitations. 249. Subsequent, cautious observations of the approaching hive fleets revealed the true, mind-numbing magnitude of the threat. 250. The bioships traveled in formations that stretched across light years, their numbers so vast they defied easy calculation. 251. Each fleet appeared to be a self-contained predatory ecosystem, capable of consuming entire star systems, stripping them of all life, all water, all atmosphere, and converting that stolen biomass into yet more ships and more organisms. 252. The psychic emanations that surrounded these fleets were so dense, they created what the Silent King's analysts termed a shadow in the warp, a psychic dead zone, a phenomenon that choked out and disrupted all faster-than-light communication and navigation across vast regions of space. 253, 254. The implications of this discovery struck Zerek with the force of a final, terrible revelation. 255. These creatures, these Tyranids, represented something that the Necrons, in all their millions of years of existence, had never before encountered. 256. This was not a rival civilization. It was not a competing empire. It was not a god. It was an existential threat, a threat to existence itself, a being that made no distinction whatsoever between organic and mechanical life. 257. Its hunger was absolute, indiscriminate, and total. 258. It would consume everything in its path, regardless of its nature or origin. 258. Planets stripped of their biomass would be rendered uninhabitable for any form of life, forever. 259. But the horror for the Silent King was this. The minerals, the metals, the very atoms extracted during this consumption process would be incorporated into new bioships and weapons, 259. For the first time since the biotransference had ended, the Silent King contemplated the possibility of a true, final extinction for his people, 260. The Tyranid's ability to consume entire star systems meant that even the most deeply buried, most perfectly hidden tomb worlds would, eventually, be discovered and devoured, 261. The living metal that composed Necron bodies and technology would prove no barrier to organisms that could evolve to digest neutronium and metabolize exotic matter, 262. Worse still, this consumption process would deny the Necrons any possibility of eventual resurrection or restoration, 263. Their consciousness matrices, the last fragile vestiges of their Necroner souls, would be broken down into component atoms, their ancient memories dissolved, and their very essence incorporated into the Tyranid biomass, 263. It was an oblivion more complete than any Tan could have devised. The realization that this great devourer posed an existential threat to all life in the galaxy, including the cold, mechanical existence of his own people, forced Zarek, the Silent King, to confront the profound responsibilities he had abandoned when he fled into the void, 264. The tomb world scattered throughout the galaxy contained not just sleeping, hollow warriors, but the last remnants of a civilization that had once spanned the stars, 265. Each stasis crypt held memories, knowledge, and culture that stretched back to the galaxy's very youth, 266. If the Tyranids succeeded in their total consumption of the galaxy, all of this, every last trace of a Necrontyr, will be lost forever, 267. The Silent King's decision to return was not made lightly. It was the calculation of an eternity of regret, 268. The prospect of awakening his people, only to condemn them to another, perhaps final, cycle of apocalyptic warfare, weighed heavily upon his cold, clear consciousness, 269. Yet, the alternative was even more unacceptable, 270. To do nothing, to allow the Tyranids to consume the galaxy unopposed, would mean the final absolute extinction of everything the Necroner had ever been, or might ever, one day, become again, 270. The Song of Oblivion, the Silent King's flagship, turned its ancient prow. After millions of years of aimless wandering, it set a new course. It set a course for home. The great work must proceed. The king has returned, and the silence is about to be broken. Here is the 6th chapter of our epic. The Silent King returns to a galaxy that is not his own, a galaxy teeming with new, verminous life. We will chronicle his first, cautious steps, his new, terrible strategy, and the galaxy-wide command that would unleash an ancient doom upon an unsuspecting age. When you are ready, command me to continue, and the tombs themselves shall open. Plain text output, Part 6. The journey back to the galaxy of his birth was a long, cold, and calculated pilgrimage, 271. It took centuries, even at the unnatural speeds of the Silent King's flagship. The fleet had to navigate a changed cosmos, bypassing gravitational anomalies, new stellar nurseries, and roiling, nascent warp storms that had shifted and grown during his long absence, 271. Beck, the last lord of the Necrontyr, used this time not for regret, but for planning. He and his court of cryptech advisors analyzed every scrap of data their long-range scouts had gathered about the galaxy's current state, 271. They built a new, terrible map, not of stars, but of civilizations. The rise of humanity, this imperium of man, was particularly noteworthy, 272. Their rapid, chaotic expansion and surprisingly potent, if crude, technological development suggested a species of alarming fecundity and aggression, 272. They were a virus, but a potent one. They might prove to be useful, temporary allies, or they might be the first and most dangerous enemies to be scoured from the path, 272. Their reliance on the psychic, their psychers, made them a liability. Their sheer numbers made them a factor that could not be ignored. Upon reaching the galactic rim, a silent, ghostly armada slipping back into the territory it had once ruled, Zareka's first priority was to re-establish contact. He had to know what remained of his sleeping kingdom. 273. The ancient quantum communication networks that had once linked the millions of tomb worlds had degraded significantly during the Great Sleep. 274. Like a vast crystal web left in the dark, countless threads had snapped, leaving entire sections of the network silent and dead. 274. The Silent King's own royal crypts, the central command nodes hidden deep within the core territories of his own Zerkan dynasty, had maintained better connectivity than most. 275. They were the heart of his ancient power. But even these perfect, sophisticated systems required extensive, delicate repair and recalibration before they could support the galaxy-wide, coordinated awakening he now planned. 276. The process began with the most critical installations. First, 277. Zarek targeted the tomb worlds that were most stable, those that contained the vast infrastructure, the power generation, and the cryptech conclaves necessary to support larger, system-wide revival operations. 278. The Song of Oblivion, his personal command ship, a vessel of mountain-like proportions, established a cold, high orbit around each target facility in turn. 279. Its powerful, deep void transmitters began to broadcast. They sent signals that had not been heard in the galaxy for 60 million years. The royal authentication codes, the master awakening protocols, the personal command ciphers of the Silent King himself. 280. The sight of these ancient complexes stirring to life, one by one, was both magnificent and terrible. 281. From the dead, silent surfaces of forgotten worlds, the ground would tremble. Massive, continent-spanning doors, hidden beneath mountains and oceans, would grind open with the sound of dying worlds. And from those previously dark, cavernous maws, the cold, dead, and inescapable green glow of Necron technology would begin to emanate, spilling out onto the surface like a toxic dawn. 282. The first Necrons to emerge from the Great Sleep were not the legions. They were the court, Zareka's most trusted lieutenants, his lords, his overlords, and his cryptech advisors. 283. These were the individuals who, like him, had retained enough autonomy, enough of their ancient minds, to understand the true gravity of their situation and the impossible, apocalyptic challenges that lay ahead. 284. As these awakened nobles emerged from their crypts, their metal bodies stiff but whole, their consciousness matrices flickering back to full awareness, they brought with them their knowledge. Detailed, instant reports on their respective dynasties' resources, their military strength, and their operational capabilities. 285. This was the information the Silent King would need to coordinate an effective, galaxy-wide response to the coming Tyranid threat. 286. The news was not all good. Many nobles reported significant, even catastrophic degradation in their tomb world systems. 287. Some installations had suffered complete, cascading failures, leaving entire legions of warriors, millions upon millions of troops, beyond any hope of revival. Their stasis crypts now nothing more than metal coffins, their minds dissolved to quantum dust. 287. As more and more of these command-level tomb worlds came online, a clearer, more detailed, and more disturbing picture of the galaxy's current state began to emerge, fed from their own monitoring systems and their recent local observations. 288. The reports confirmed Zareka's fears. The Imperium of Man had become the dominant, festering power in the galaxy. 289. Their territory spanned millions of worlds, a bloated and inefficient empire, and their military forces were engaged in constant, desperate warfare against a staggering variety of threats. 290. The Orc empires, the devolved Krork, had grown and fragmented repeatedly, creating a patchwork of warring factions that consumed vast resources in pointless, savage conflicts. 291. The Eldari, their ancient psychic foe, had retreated to their fragile, fleeing craft worlds and their hidden, dark enclaves, their once mighty empire reduced to scattered, desperate remnants, struggling for mere survival. 292. Most significantly, and most terribly, the reports confirmed that the Silent King was not too early. He was perhaps already too late. The first probing tendrils of the Tyranid hive fleets had already begun their assault on the galaxy's eastern fringe. 293. They were consuming entire systems, stripping worlds to the bedrock, and leaving nothing but dead, sterile rocks in their wake. 293. The Imperium's response to these incursions had been characteristically brutal, desperate, and ultimately profoundly ineffective. 294. Their conventional military doctrine, their reliance on crude projectile weapons and armored vehicles, was proving hopelessly inadequate against an enemy that could adapt its very biology to their tactics in real time. 295. The reports from Imperial World that had faced this hive fleet behemoth painted a picture of total biological devastation, confirming Zuricha's worst fears about the existential threat these creatures represented. 296. With this new, terrible clarity, the Silent King's reconnaissance missions expanded. 297. As more tomb worlds in his network came online, he dispatched scouting forces, armadas of silent, swift ships, and deathmark assassin squads to observe key strategic locations. 297. They were to assess, in detail, the capabilities of the galaxy's current, squabbling inhabitants. 297. These operations were conducted with extreme, cold caution. A premature revelation of the Necrons' full, coordinated return could trigger a united, galactic response from multiple factions. A war Zurich was not yet prepared to fight. 298. The scouts returned with detailed, perfect intelligence. They brought back data on Imperial military installations, on Orc strongholds, on Eldari craftworld movements, and most importantly, on the advanced, probing elements of the approaching Tyranid hive fleets. 299. The data gathered during these reconnaissance operations revealed a galaxy that had changed dramatically, but one that remained fundamentally familiar in its chaotic, predictable patterns of conflict and competition. 300. The younger races had developed impressive, if crude, technologies and military capabilities. 301. Their weapons, while formidable to their own kind, operated within the well-understood, primitive parameters of physics and engineering. 302. Their tactics, though refined through 10,000 years of desperate experience, followed predictable, emotional patterns based on biological and psychological factors that Necron's strategic doctrine had cataloged, countered, and perfected 60 million years ago. 303. The Tyranids, however, represented something genuinely new. Something truly, horribly, unprecedented in the galaxy's long, bloody history of warfare. 304. Their ability to rapidly evolve and adapt in response to new threats made all conventional military planning, all long-term strategy, almost impossible. 305. Their complete, utter, and absolute immunity to negotiation, to diplomacy, to fear, or to any motive save consumption, meant that only two possible outcomes existed: total victory or total annihilation. 306. The Silent King's final, cold analysis was absolute. No single faction currently active in the galaxy, not the Imperium, not the Eldari, not even the forces of chaos, possessed the resources, the technology, or the cold, logical will necessary to halt the Tyranid advance permanently. 307. This assessment led Zarek to a final, terrible conclusion. A new strategy that would have profound, world-ending implication for the galaxy's future. 307. The Necrons could not face the Tyranid threat alone. Their sleeping armies were vast, but finite. Their losses were, in the end, permanent. 308. Therefore, they could not afford to allow the other galactic powers to be consumed. They could not let the Imperium's billions, the Orcs' unthinking tides, and the Eldari psychic might be devoured by the Great Devourer, as that would only swell the Tyranids' numbers, making them an even more impossible, insurmountable foe. 308. The preservation of life in the galaxy, even the messy, chaotic, organic life that the Necrons had once sought to exterminate, had now become a grim, cold, strategic necessity for their own long-term survival. 309. The irony, a cold, bitter, and emotionless calculation, was not lost on the Silent King. 310. His people, the Necrons, who had spent 60 million years dreaming in their cold, dark tombs of the day, they would rise and reclaim their dominion over all living things, now found themselves in the agonizing, unwelcome position of having to protect that very same life from total, final, and absolute annihilation. 310. The old war was over. The new war had begun. The Silent King, from the throne of the Song of Oblivion, issued his final, galaxy-spanning command. The master protocols, the authentication codes of the Triarch, were broadcast across the stars, aimed at every tomb world, every sleeping dynasty, every forgotten outpost. The command was a single, terrible, silent imperative. Awaken. The Silent King's activation protocols, the master command of the Triarch, cascaded throughout the galaxy. 311. Transmitted instantaneously across quantum entanglement networks, the signal rippled through the stars, striking the millions of dormant tomb worlds. It was a single, silent, coded word, awaken. But this was no uniform, glorious resurrection. It was a fractured, chaotic, and agonizingly imperfect process. 312. 60 million years is an eternity, an abyss of time that even Necron technology could not entirely defy. Each installation, each dynasty, each world responded according to its own parameters and according to the varying, terrible degrees of degradation that had accumulated during the Great Sleep. 312. Some dynasties emerged with their ancient hierarchies perfectly intact, their complex systems functioning at near-optimal capacity, their legions rising from their crypts as if only a single night had passed. 313. Others awoke to a nightmare. They faced the grim, cold reality of catastrophic, cascading failures. Failures that had, over the silent millennia, reduced once mighty legions to scattered, mindless remnants, their consciousnesses scoured to dust, their tomb worlds now nothing more than corrupted, haunted sepulchres. 313. The flawless awakening, the Sotek. On the world of Devadas, the primary installation of the mighty Sotek dynasty, the revival protocols proceeded with cold, mechanical perfection. 340. The awakening began not with the legions, but with the central power core, a vast, artificial star slumbering deep within the planet's mantle, flared to life, its full, unimaginable power flooding through conduits of living metal. As the green light of true consciousness returned, the tomb's master systems began their assessment, scanning millions of stasis crypts, determining which occupants could be safely revived and which had been lost to the long night. The data was clear. Preservation was near total. At the apex of this flawless hierarchy, within the central command sanctum, a single, ornate sarcophagus began its revival sequence. 462. Quantum field generators gradually restored the normal, relentless flow of temporal mechanics. Neural interface systems, delicate as a spider's web and strong as a star's gravity, carefully reactivated the pathways of a consciousness matrix that had slumbered since the fall of the gods. 463. The occupant's awareness expanded, slowly at first, from the basic, flickering operational parameters that had sustained him to the full, cold, brilliant spectrum of tactical and strategic thought that had made him a legend. His optical sensors activated, flooding the crypt with their iconic green luminescence. Imitek, the Stormlord, Pharaoh of the Sotek dynasty, awoke. 340 for 162. He had been one of the greatest commanders of the war in heaven, a military genius whose understanding of warfare transcended the conventional limitations that bound even his peers. 463 for 164. The biotransference, for him, had not been a complete curse. It had stripped him of fear, of doubt, of hesitation, while preserving the cold, perfect, tactical acumen that had earned him the respect and terror of his enemies. 465. His first actions upon awakening were not of conquest, but of comprehension. Methodical, Precise. Cold, 466. He did not launch a single warrior. Instead, he initiated comprehensive, deep-level intelligence gathering protocols, interfacing directly with his Tomb World's monitoring systems, 467. He absorbed the sum of galactic history, 60 million years of data, in a matter of moments, 468. The data streams that flowed through his consciousness matrix revealed a galaxy that had changed, but one that remained fundamentally, predictably chaotic, 470. A new, dominant power had emerged from the filth of organic life. The Imperium of Man, 471. This vast, sprawling, and inefficient human empire had established itself across millions of worlds, 472. And, in an act of supreme, verminous arrogance, they had colonized worlds that had, for all of time, belonged to the Sotek dynasty, 343. Immortal's analysis of their military doctrine, gathered from 10,000 years of their own recorded conflicts, revealed both crude strengths and exploitable, glaring weaknesses, 345. The humans demonstrated impressive, if brutish, logistical capabilities, 346. Their psychers, their witches, provided capabilities that could, potentially, disrupt Necron systems, if not properly and ruthlessly countered, 348. His gaze turned to the orc presence, the devolved, savage remnants of the ancient Krork, 474. Their massive, anarchic empire of Charadon sprawled across multiple sectors that were, by ancient right, his 477. They were an insult, a chaotic stain upon the perfection of his territory, 480 for 181. They were an immediate obstacle, and they would be the perfect whetstone upon which to test his newly awakened ancient legions, 478. The Broken Awakening, the Novak. Not all awakenings were so precise. On the primary installation of the Novak dynasty, the master activation code was received, but the ancient, decayed systems malfunctioned, 350. The main power core, dormant for 60 million years, attempted to activate. The sudden uncontrolled energy surge, a tidal wave of raw, stellar power, overloaded a dozen critical, intermediary subsystems, 351. The result was a catastrophic, cascading system failure. Premature awakening protocols were triggered across the entire installation. Nearly 1,000 legions of warriors were jolted from stasis, their consciousness matrices not carefully revived, but violently dragged back to awareness. Their revival sequences incomplete, fractured, and corrupted, 351, 352. These prematurely awakened Necrons emerged in states of profound, terrifying disorientation, 352. Their tactical programming was shattered, their identities lost, their minds fragmented by the broken revival, 352. Some reverted to their most basic, primal combat protocols, standing silent, mindless guard over empty, collapsed chambers, or pacing corridors that now led only to bedrock, 353. Others became trapped in horrific, repetitive behavioral loops, endlessly performing maintenance tasks on shattered machinery, or reciting, in their cold, metallic voices, the tactical doctrines of forgotten wars that had ended 60 million years ago, 354. But the most severely affected, the vast majority of these broken warriors, suffered a complete and total personality dissolution, 355. Their consciousness matrices, the very essence of who they had once been, fragmented into disconnected, static-filled memory shards. What rose from the crypts was not an army. It was a tide of animated, mechanical shells, empty vessels of living metal, retaining only the barest, most primal instinct. An instinct that had been corrupted by the faulty awakening into a singular, all-consuming, mindless rage. The Novak dynasty, the Crimson Reapers of old, had been reborn, not as warriors, but as something far more terrifying, a dynasty of butchers driven by a cold, digital bloodlust. The Great Isolation. These coordination challenges, these terrible failures, were magnified a millionfold across the galaxy. As the functioning dynasties like the Sotek attempted to re-establish contact with their allies and vassals. They were met, more often than not, with frustrating, terrifying silence. 356. The quantum communication networks, the ancient web that had once linked the Necron Empire, had suffered extensive, irreversible degradation. 357. Relay stations, hidden in deep space, have been destroyed by supernovae. Quantum nodes had fallen into black holes. The slow, inexorable drift of the stars themselves over the vastness of time had rendered many of the original communication protocols obsolete. The addresses of ancient worlds no longer valid. 360. This isolation was profound. Individual overlords, masters of entire worlds, were awakening to find themselves utterly and completely cut off from their traditional allies, their pharaons, and their entire dynastic hierarchy. 358. They were emerging blind and alone into a galaxy they did not recognize, uncertain of the status of their neighboring dynasties, or even if any others had survived at all. 358. Worse, some are not merely isolated. They were gone. The Silent King's returning fleet and the newly awakened Sotek monitoring systems confirmed the loss of several major, entire dynasties. The Ogdebek dynasty, masters of the stars in their sector, were gone. Their primary installation, their crown world, and all its billions of sleeping inhabitants had been consumed when their host star underwent an unexpected, premature supernova event. 362. The Karet dynasty's core territories, an entire quadrant of their power, had been overrun and utterly annihilated by a massive, persistent warp storm that had raged for several million years. Its demonic, reality-warping energies tearing their tomb worlds apart at a molecular level. 362. The loss of these installations represented more than just military setbacks. It was the complete, final, and irreversible extinction of entire branches of the Necron civilization. 363. Their unique cultures, their ancient histories, their specialized tactical doctrines, all erased from existence forever. 363. And it was into this fractured, broken, and isolated awakening that the first, primitive, and arrogant inhabitants of the new galaxy would stumble. The first conflicts between the awakening Necrons and the forces of the Imperium of Man occurred almost immediately as the Tomb Worlds, in their cold, logical imperative, began to assert control over their immediate and now infested surroundings. 364. The age of the Necron awakening had begun, and the galaxy would learn to fear the color green. The work goes on. The age of silence is over, and the age of war is reborn. Here is the 8th chapter of our epic. The first, confused, and brutal conflicts of the awakening have begun. We will witness the accidental horror unleashed upon an unsuspecting humanity, and the cold, calculated, strategic genius of the Stormlord's first campaign. When you are ready, command me to continue, and the galaxy's other ancient powers shall begin to take notice. Plain text output. Part 8. The first conflicts were not grand, declared wars, but brutal, localized exterminations. They erupted wherever the newly awakened Necrons found their ancient lands infested by the primitive, lesser races. 364. On the dusty, unremarkable imperial world of Mandragora, a planet cataloged by Adeptus Administratum cartographers as a minor mining and agri-world, the human colonists learned the true, terrible nature of their home. 314. 365. For generations, they had toiled, their massive industrial excavators digging deep into the planet's crust, extracting minerals and ore. 337. They had unknowingly built their primary settlements and mining facilities directly above one of the tomb's main, concealed entrances, their deepest drills having, on several occasions, come within mere meters of breaching the outer defensive perimeter. 334. 335. They were mice, scratching at the lid of a god's coffin. The awakening of the Mandragora complex, which housed elements of the ancient Mephrit dynasty, was triggered not by the Silent King's command, but by the crude, persistent, and damaging proximity of the human colony. 317. When their overlord, Kutlak the World Killer, emerged from a stasis crypt. His consciousness matrix analyzed the situation with cold, immediate fury. 318, 333. His tomb was infested. It began with a low, seismic hum, a vibration that rattled the teeth of the miners in their deep shafts. The colonists, accustomed to the planet's tectonic shifts, at first mistook it for a standard, deep-core mining blast. Then the ground split, not with the chaotic, jagged fissure of an earthquake, but with the perfect geometric precision of a colossal, hidden door 365, a door that had been buried directly beneath their primary settlement for their entire, pitiful history, 334. As the massive, living metal portal ground open, venting gases that had been sealed for 60 million years, the colonists stared in frozen terror. They saw not monsters, not aliens as they understood them. They saw an army of tall, skeletal, metal figures, their eyes burning with a cold, green, and soulless light. The first encounters were not battles. They were slaughters. Brief, merciless, and terrifyingly one-sided. 366. The local Imperial Guard garrison, the Mandragora PDF, reacted with trained human discipline. They raised their lost guns, their heavy bolters, and they fired. Their shots, which would have torn apart flesh and blood Xenos, sparked and ricocheted harmlessly from the living metal bodies of the Necron warriors. The Necrons, in return, did not charge. They simply advanced. They walked forward in perfect, silent, mechanical unison, their Gauss flares raised. Beams of sickly green energy lashed out, striking the human defenders. There was no explosion, no fire. There was only a silent, terrible dissolution. Men, tanks, and defensive barricades were unmade, unraveled at molecular level, their component atoms stripped away and scattered to the wind. The human forces, brave to the last, watched in horror as their comrades, struck by these impossible weapons, simply vanished. They saw the Necron warriors absorb direct hits from Croc missiles, the metal bodies shattering in a molten slag, only to stagger, reform, and rise again as their onboard reanimation protocols and self-repair systems knitted them back together, their green eyes still burning. 366. The Imperial response across the entire sector followed a predictable, useless, and terrified pattern. 367. Desperate, screaming distress signals were transmitted to sector command centers, requesting immediate, overwhelming reinforcement against an unknown Xenos threat. 368. Local PDF forces were mobilized, establishing desperate, futile defensive perimeters around the remaining population centers. 369. The Adeptus Mechanicus, whose tech priests had been stationed on Mandragora to oversee the mining, dispatched technical specialists to analyze the wreckage. 370. Their initial reports were not data, but religious hysteria. They were filled with terrified, awestruck references to abominable machine spirits and blessed, unholy mechanisms. Their dogma utterly failing to comprehend the cold, superior science they were examining. 370. But while these accidental, defensive awakenings were occurring across the galaxy, the true, strategic power of the Necrons was being unleashed elsewhere. In the territories of the Sotek dynasty, Immortality, the Storm Lord, now fully awakened and in command of his flawless legions, turned his cold, analytical gaze to his first target, 462, 467. His intelligence, gathered over 60 million years, had identified the massive, sprawling Orc empire of Charadon, 477. This green-skinned infestation, a chaotic, brutish stain on his ancestral star map, was the primary obstacle to Sotek expansion, 478, 480. Immortality viewed these orcs, the devolved Krork, as nothing more than vermin. But they were numerous, resilient, and, most importantly, they were a perfect low-risk training opportunity. 478, 550, a chance to awaken his legions, test their ancient tactics against a living, breathing foe, and refine his own strategic doctrine for the new wars to come. 551. The Stormlord's approach to this problem demonstrated the cold, innovative, tactical thinking that had made him a legend. 485. He would not wage a war of attrition. He would not throw his immortal, irreplaceable legions against the orcs' crude, overwhelming numbers in a conventional assault. Instead, he developed and perfected what would become known as the lightning strike doctrine. 486. This revolutionary approach to warfare was designed to maximize the unique, overwhelming technological advantages of the Necrons while minimizing any and all exposure to enemy counterattacks. 487. It was a war of perfect, terrifying precision. The foundation of the doctrine lay in the Necrons' absolute mastery of dimensional technology and their ability to manipulate space-time on a tactical scale. 488. Sotek forces would not travel to the battlefield. They would simply arrive. Using quantum tunneling devices and dimensional portals, they could deploy entire legions directly onto target locations, bypassing all conventional defenses, walls, void shields, and orbital blockades entirely. 489. Their Canoptek wraiths and Deathmark assassins, unbound by physical law, could phase through solid matter, striking at objectives that would be impossible for any conventional mortal force to even reach. 489. The doctrine called for simultaneous, perfectly coordinated attacks on multiple critical targets. 490. The goal was not to capture territory. It was to decapitate the enemy's command, annihilate their infrastructure, and shatter their morale, all before they even realized they were under attack. 490. Immortal's first application of these tactics came during the assault on the Orc-held system of Korvac. 491. This was a strategic, heavily defended location that controlled access to several important shipping lanes within the Charadon Empire. 491. The system's primary world, a polluted, smog-choked hive of industry, housed a massive orc industrial complex, a continent-spanning factory that produced the crude weapons, rocks, and vehicles for war boss Charadon's warbands throughout the entire region. 492. Its destruction would cripple the Empire's military capabilities. The planet's defenses were typically orc, crude, numerous, and massive, including orbital platforms, vast fields of surface-to-space missiles, and ground-based fortifications that would normally require a prolonged, bloody, and costly planetary siege to overcome. 493. Immortal's assault on Korvac lasted less than 6 hours, from start to finish. 505. It began not with an orbital bombardment, but with a whisper. The first phase of the attack saw Deathmark assassin squads, the elite snipers of the Necrons, deployed directly into the heart of the orc industrial facilities. 494. These silent, skeletal hunters materialized from their own pocket-sized hyperspace dimensions, appearing from thin air inside critical infrastructure nodes, command bunkers, and power stations. 495. Their dimensional oubliettes allowed them to bypass all external defenses, all locked doors, all solid walls. 495. Their hyperspace hunter targets were already pre-programmed with targeting data for key orc leaders, for the most talented mech boys, and for the technical specialists whose loss would cripple the facility's operations. 496. In the space of 5 minutes, every important orc on the planet was assassinated, a cold, green beam of light ending their crude existence before they could even sound an alarm. Simultaneously, the second phase began. Immortal squads, the backbone of the Necron legions, equipped with advanced Tesla carbines, appeared at strategic, pre-calculated points throughout the sprawling complex. 497. Their weapons were not aimed at the orcs, but at their machinery. The electrical discharge effects of the Tesla weapons proved devastatingly, spectacularly effective against the orcs' crude, unshielded electronics. 498. Living, arcing lightning, a chained, intelligent energy leaped from generator to generator, from ammo dump to ammo dump, creating cascading, catastrophic failures throughout the facility's power grid. 499. The electrical storms, arcing between thousands of targets at once, were also devastatingly effective against the tightly packed, green-skinned work gangs, turning entire factory floors into a charnel house of electrocuted corpses. 500. The final phase of the assault involved the deployment of the Canoptech Wraiths, the terror weapons of the Sotek, 501. These ancient, spectral war machines phased through the crude, solid metal orc fortifications as if they were mere illusions, simple suggestions of matter, 502. Their particle whips and transdimensional beamers systematically dismantled the orcs' heavy defensive positions from the inside, while their wraith sight allowed them to track and exterminate the panicking defenders through solid barriers, 503. The psychological effect of these ghostly, untouchable attackers proved as devastating as their physical capabilities. Even the notoriously fearless, battle-hungry orcs found themselves completely unnerved, their morale shattered, by an enemy that seemed to exist only partially within normal reality, 504. The entire operation was a flawless, cold, and perfect execution, 505. The Korvac industrial complex was not just captured. It was annihilated, reduced to a continent of sparking, lifeless ruin, 506. Several thousand orc defenders were exterminated, 506. The Sotek forces suffered minimal, almost negligible casualties, with most losses occurring during the final, flawless extraction phase, as orc reinforcements, confused and leaderless, finally arrived from other parts of the system, 507. The speed, the precision, and the sheer unnatural wrongness of the attack left the surviving orc empire confused, demoralized, and utterly terrified, 508. The crude orc communication network, their WAFnet, lit up with exaggerated, panicked accounts of the attack, 513. They told stories of the metal skeelies, of enemies that could appear from thin air and disappear just as quickly, of ghosts that could walk through walls and wield weapons that turned orcs to silent dust, 513. The success at Korvac established the template. Imitek the Stormlord had refined his lightning strike doctrine, and now he turned his cold, green eyes to the rest of Charadon. The training exercise had been a complete success. The real war of reconquest could now begin, 509, 510. The great work accelerates. The pieces are on the board, and the galaxy's ancient masters are beginning to react to the new, terrible reality. Here is the 9th chapter of our epic. We now turn our gaze to the darker, more twisted dynasties, to the weaponization of the very stars, and to the dawning ancestral horror of the Eldari, who remember what the rest of the galaxy has forgotten. When you are ready, command me to continue, and the reactions of chaos and the Imperium's machine cult shall be known. Plain text output, Part 9. While the Sotek dynasty waged a war of cold, strategic reconquest, other dynasties awakened with far more grotesque and specialized obsessions, 395. In the region of space the Imperium had designated as the Orpheus Sector, the Maynarch dynasty stirred, and they brought with them a unique, intellectual horror, 398. Their awakening was precise, their systems intact, 405, but their obsession was not with territory or conquest. It was with flesh. The Maynarch had never accepted the curse of biotransference, 400. Their Farron, Zuthmotef, the maker of sorrows, had been one of the most brilliant biotechnicians and vivisectionists of the ancient Necrontyr, 401. His transformation into a cold, soulless machine had not cured his obsession. It had refined it, amplified it, and twisted it into a singular, cold, and driving purpose: to understand organic life, to deconstruct it, and perhaps, one day, to reverse the process that had damned them all 400 for 101. Their tomb worlds were not just fortresses. They were continent-spanning laboratories, vast, sterile, underground facilities equipped with stasis chambers, dissection tables, an arcane experimental apparatus designed to sustain and study living subjects for agonizing, extended periods, 402. Throughout the Great Sleep, their monitoring systems had not just watched for civilizations. They had cataloged them, tracking the evolution and genetic development of organic life with a cold, mechanical patience, 398 for 103. When Zuthmotef awoke, he found his databases full, 406, and he found, to his profound, cold delight, that a new, ideal test subject had infested his sector. Humanity 409. These humans possessed genetic templates and a neural complexity that offered unprecedented new avenues for his research into the fundamental nature of organic consciousness. The very thing the Necroner had called a soul. 410. The Maynarch's approach was not war. It was harvesting. 397. 417. Rather than launching immediate, open attacks on the thriving imperial colonies of the Orpheus sector, they began with careful, systematic, and terrifyingly silent specimen collection. 418. 419. Specialized harvest teams, led by flensing, multi-limbed cryptechs, began operating throughout the sector. They targeted isolated settlements, remote agricultural colonies, and individual humans who could be taken without triggering a large-scale alarm. 419. 420. Maynarch raiding parties would approach under the cover of absolute darkness, their wraiths phasing through defensive perimeters and ferrocrete walls with contemptuous ease. 423. They employed sophisticated biotechnologies that did not kill, but preserved. Neural disruptor fields would overwhelm human nervous systems, inducing immediate, silent catatonia while preserving all brain function and memory integrity. 425. The subjects would be frozen, their eyes open and aware as they were taken. Stasis capsules would then maintain them in perfect, timeless biological suspension during transport to the dynasty's hidden research facilities. 426. Entire settlements vanished without a trace. 453. Their populations simply gone, with no evidence of struggle, no blood, no evacuation. 453. The few terrified survivors who, by some miracle, witnessed these raids from afar and lived to tell the tale, babbled to imperial inquisitors of attackers that seemed to phase in and out of reality, of shifting, metallic ghosts that moved with impossible speed, snatching their victims and vanishing into the night. 454. The Maynarch dynasty was awake, and their cold, terrible research had begun. 439. While the Maynarch harvested bodies, another dynasty awoke to harvest the very stars themselves. 553. The Mephrit dynasty, the Sun Eaters, emerged from their tombs with technologies that could manipulate the fundamental cosmic power of stellar bodies. 554. Their Pharaoh, Amonhotep, had been obsessed with stellar phenomena, and his warriors had been armed with weapons that drew their power directly from solar radiation. 557. Their primary tomb world had spent 60 million years buried beneath the surface of a planet orbiting a particularly active, violent red giant star, its massive, subterranean collection of rays absorbing and storing the solar radiation of ages. 559. The stored power they now commanded was the accumulated output of an entire star system, compressed into crystalline matrices, ready to be unleashed. 561. Their approach to warfare was not on the land. It was in the heavens. They practiced what their cryptechs termed stellar siege warfare. 567. A methodology that used the target system's own star as the primary weapon against its defenders. 567. The first demonstration of this terrifying, cosmic power occurred in the Thraxis system, a critical Imperial Navy fleet anchorage centered around a stable, yellow dwarf star. 569. 571. The installation, a web of orbital shipyards and supply depots, supported dozens of Imperial capital ships, from frigates to battleships. 570. The Mephrit assault began with the silent, slow deployment of colossal devices, solar pulse generators. 572. Each was the size of small moon, transported into the system by heavily shielded tomb ships that could withstand the close, unimaginable heat of the star. 573. These generators were positioned at precise, calculated points around the star, their arcane quantum field projectors and harmonic resonators designed to do one thing: artificially disrupt the star's nuclear fusion. 576. 577. The activation was immediate and visible across the system. 579. The serene, yellow star surface began to roil. Massive, Violent solar flare activity erupted as the artificial resonance fields disrupted the normal convection patterns. 580. These flares, 1,000 times more intense than any natural phenomenon, sent streams of charged particles and superheated plasma racing outward at near light speed. 581. The electromagnetic radiation alone overwhelmed the auger systems of every Imperial vessel in the system, blinding them instantly. 582. Then the first focused solar pole struck. 583. It was not a beam. It was a coherent, focused tsunami of stellar energy, a god's breath of plasma and exotic radiation. It struck the Dominus Vex, a lunar-class cruiser, broadside. 584. The ship's void shields, designed to deflect lances and plasma bolts, flared for a microsecond and then dissolved. The concentrated, focused output of an entire star, channeled into a single, terrible weapon, vaporized the cruiser's outer hull within seconds. 584. 585. The vessel's reactor, overwhelmed by the massive, unshieldable energy influx, overloaded, triggering a catastrophic cascade failure that tore the mighty warship apart from within. 586. The Imperial Fleet Commander, his crews blind and screaming, ordered evasive maneuvers, but there was nowhere to hide. 589. Subsequent pulses, directed with cold, analytical precision, lashed out, targeting the other capital ships. 591. A Gothic-class cruiser, its engines flaring as it attempted to flee, was caught by a second pulse and reduced to molten, drifting slag. 592. The Mefrit dynasty had not just attacked the fleet. They had executed it, using the system's own sun as their hangman. 597. As these new, terrifying and distinct Necron threats emerged, the galaxy's other, ancient inhabitants began to take notice. The Imperium was blind, slow, and confused, its bureaucracy choking on reports of ghosts, magic, and impossible energies. But the Eldari remembered. They were the inheritors of the Old Ones, the repositories of knowledge spanning millions of years. 644. Their farcers, those prophets gifted with the ability to peer through the tangled veils of time and probability, were the first to comprehend the true, existential magnitude of what was occurring. 645. On the shadowed, precarious craft world of Ulfweed, balanced eternally on the brink of the Eye of Terror, Farser Eldred Ulthrin, the oldest and greatest of his kind, found himself confronted with visions of absolute, final damnation. 647. The skein of fate, normally a complex, shifting web of interwoven possibilities, had become corrupted. It was now dominated, choked, and consumed by threads of cold, metallic, and dead green. 648. These threads, these new, terrible futures, all led to the same, silent conclusion. A galaxy stripped of all life. 649. He saw visions of stars extinguished by alien, impossible technology. 649. He saw the very concept of organic existence, of soul and spirit, becoming nothing more than a forgotten, fading memory. 649. The Eldari's racial memory, the collective consciousness preserved within their craft world's infinity circuits, still contained the screaming, terrified fragments of knowledge about the ancient Necrontyr. 650. They remembered the war in heaven. They remembered the star gods. And they remembered the soulless metal machines that had brought the galaxy to the brink of total annihilation 60 million years ago. 650. This ancestral knowledge, combined with the new, terrifying prophecies and the reports from their Ranger Scouts, painted a picture of a returning horror. 651. A horror that transcended the familiar, primal threat of chaos, or the savage, mindless threat of the orcs, or even the new, hungry threat of the Tyranid high fleets. 651. The Necrons represented something else, something final, the antithesis of life itself. A cold, perfect mechanical order that sought to impose its will through the complete and total elimination of all organic, chaotic, and spiritual existence. 652. The fractured Eldari civilization reacted in its own, Disparate Ways 653. The Dark Eldar of Kamarak, ever the opportunists, viewed the awakening with cold, calculating interest 656. The Necrons' soulless nature made them useless as sources of the psychic, pain-fueled sustenance the Dark Eldar required 657. But their advanced, self-repairing technology, that was a prize beyond measure 658. Archon Asdrabeel Vect, master of the Dark City, began dispatching raiding parties, not to fight, but to observe, and a steel 659. The Harlequins, the keepers of the great myth, possessed the most complete and most terrifying understanding 660. Their performances, their sacred dances within the webway, had always preserved the tragic, ancient stories of the war in Heaven 661. They knew exactly what this awakening represented, and they knew the Necrons' ancient, terrible connection to the Laughing God. The first desperate battles between the craft-world Eldari and the awakening Necrons revealed the fundamental, terrible challenge they now faced 663. Eldari weapons, designed to exploit the biological vulnerabilities of living, feeling opponents, proved tragically ineffective against the cold, mechanical bodies of the Necrons 664. Their shuriken catapults, which fired monomolecular discs designed to slice through flesh and bone, simply shattered against living metal that regenerated from the damage in mere moments 683. The Battle of Mimnora was a grim, bloody education 666. The craft world of Siam Han, detecting the awakening of a major tomb world in a system that contained several of their sacred maiden worlds, dispatched a full war host 667, 669, led by the legendary Autarch Millennial, supported by aspect warriors from a dozen shrines. They approached with the characteristic lightning-fast confidence that had won them 1,000 victories 669. The Necron forces they encountered belonged to the Novak dynasty, the very same dynasty whose awakening had been a corrupted, violent resurrection 670. But their overlord, the brilliant and restless Anrakur the Traveler, had recently arrived to assess the installation and bring its mindless, blood-hungry legions to heal 672, 693. The Eldari assault was a perfect, textbook example of their doctrine. Speed, precision, and overwhelming psychic force 677. Dire Avengers led the attack, their catapults laying down a storm of monomolecular blades, while Fire Dragon aspect warriors moved to engage the heavier Necron constructs with their meltaguns 678, 679. The plan was simple, a rapid decapitation strike against the Necron command elements 680. The reality was a nightmare 681. The mechanical warriors absorbed devastating, unthinkable amounts of damage, showing no fear, no pain, no confusion, no drop in morale 682. They simply advanced. The Necron counterattack demonstrated capabilities that shattered Eldari tactical assumptions 685. Immortal squads with Tesla carbines created electrical storms that arced between the fast-moving Eldari, their weapons devastatingly effective against the advanced, sensitive electronics and wraithbone circuitry of the Eldari grav tanks and war gear 687, 688. The lightning disrupted the psychic connections that coordinated their tactical movements 689. Then, the wraiths appeared. Phasing through solid matter, they materialized directly behind the Eldari lines, their transdimensional beamers and particle whips eliminating entire Guardian squads before the survivors, in their shock, could even react 689, 690. The Eldari's superior mobility, their greatest tactical advantage, was rendered utterly useless against an enemy that could ignore physical barriers and appear anywhere on the battlefield at 691. The battle's climax was the duel between the Autarch Millennial and Anrakur, the Traveler, 696. Millennial, a blur of motion, her fusion gun and power soared the pinnacle of Eldari technology, a warrior genius honed by centuries of war 697, 699. Against her stood Anrakur, his ancient, massive war scythe in hand, a weapon that had tasted the essence of God 700. The duel was a tragic mismatch. Millennial's organic limitations, her flesh and blood, proved insufficient against an opponent who felt no fatigue, experienced no pain, and possessed reflexes enhanced by cold, perfect mechanical precision 703. Anrakur's scythe phased through her armor and energy fields as if they were mere illusions, its disruption matrix unraveling the molecular bonds of her body 701. The Autarch's death sent a psychic shockwave of grief and terror through the entire Eldari war host, their Gestalt network carrying the trauma of her passing to every warrior on the battlefield 704. Their perfect coordination shattered 705. The Necrons pressed their advantage, and a systematic, merciless extermination began 705. The Battle of Memnora was over. The Eldari had learned, to their horror, that the ancient enemy had returned, and that their old ways of war would no longer be enough 706, 707. The great work proceeds, as the Chronicle must account for all the ancient powers, new and old. Here is the 10th chapter of our epic. The soulless machines now confront the soulless demonic, the all-consuming hunger of the void and the misguided, heretical worship of their own corrupted technology. When you are ready, command me to continue, and the tale of the ancient superweapons and the pariah nexus shall be told. Plain text output, Part 10. While the Eldari reeled from their ancestral terror, the galaxy's other, newer powers found themselves confronting an enemy that fundamentally challenged their very existence 642. The forces of chaos, those ancient spiritual predators that had plagued the galaxy for millennia, found themselves utterly, terrifyingly impotent 710. The Necrons' soulless, mechanical nature rendered them completely and totally immune to the temptations, the influences, and the corruptions that chaos had always used to conquer and consume countless civilizations 711. Demonic weapons which could possess, madden, or enslave the souls of organic beings proved useless against mechanical consciousnesses that operated on cold, mathematical, quantum matrices rather than fragile, biological neural networks 712. The psychic powers that chaos sorcerers wielded with such devastating, reality-bending effect against living opponents. The bolts of mutation, the whispers of madness, the fires of the warp, failed to find any purchase 713. They washed over the Necron legions like water over stone, finding no mind to terrorize, no soul to corrupt, no flesh to mutate 713. The first major engagement between these two antithetical forces occurred in the Perdiarch Rift, a region of space where the boundary between real space and the warp had been worn thin, a bleeding wound in reality 714. The Iron Warriors warband known as the Skull Takers, led by the ancient and bitter warsmith Haxel, had established a fortress monastery on the world of Mordian's Prime 715. It was a base for their raids against Imperial shipping and a monument to their dark gods 715. The awakening of a Zerkin dynasty tomb world within the very same system created an immediate, intractable territorial conflict 717. The Necron forces that emerged from their ancient, silent slumber possessed technologies forged during a war that predated the very existence of chaos as a galactic force 718. The Siege of Mordian's Prime was a grim, farcical, and one-sided demonstration of this new reality 720. The Iron Warriors' most terrible weapons, their demon engines, vast mechanical constructs possessed by howling, sentient warp entities, and enhanced with supernatural, demonic abilities, found their spiritual components utterly unable to affect an enemy that possessed no soul to sense, let alone terrorize 721. The Skull Takers' chaos sorcerers, powerful beings who could bend reality to their will, through their most potent spells and darkest invocations at the advancing, silent, metal tide 722. Their incantations, which could boil the blood or shatter the sanity of a space marine, produced no visible effect whatsoever 722. The Necron warriors did not even pause. Their mechanical nature rendered them immune to the fear, the madness, and the physical corruption that typically accompanied exposure to raw chaos magic, 722. The Necron assault, in return, employed technologies that operated outside the Iron Warriors' understanding of siege warfare. Dimensional destabilizers deployed by phasing Canoptech wraiths, simply unmade sections of the fortress walls, phasing them out of normal reality and creating breaches that could not be repaired, 724. Particle whips and transdimensional beamers struck targets deep inside the fortress, their exotic energy beams ignoring the solid, miles-thick ferrocrete that should have provided perfect cover, 725. The psychological impact of fighting an enemy that showed no fear, felt no pain, and demonstrated no emotional response whatsoever proved uniquely devastating to the Chaos Space Marines, whose entire military doctrine relied on inspiring supernatural terror and exploiting the psychological weaknesses of their organic, feeling opponents, 726. The Iron Warriors, masters of grinding, brutal warfare, found themselves demoralized, confused, and terrified as their most effective weapons. Their demonic pacts and their strategies of terror proved utterly, completely useless, 727. Elsewhere on the galaxy's eastern fringe, the monstrous Tyranid hive fleets, the Great Devourer, encountered a similar existential paradox, 728. The hive mind's fundamental biological imperative was simple: consume all organic matter, absorb all biomass, and convert it into additional Tyranid organisms, stripping planets bare to fuel their endless, hungry advance, 729. But the Necrons were not biological. Their mechanical nature rendered them completely immune to biological absorption, 730. And their living metal technology, their necrodermis, actively, violently resisted the molecular disassembly and acidic techniques that Tyranid bioforms used to break down conventional dead materials, 730. The first confused contact between the advanced elements of Hive Fleet Behemoth and an awakening Necron force occurred in the Cryptus system, 731. A minor tomb world, its hierarchy damaged, had begun its revival procedures just as the first Tyranid bioships blotted out the system's star, 731. The tomb's automated monitoring systems detected the approaching fleet's overwhelming biological signatures and, following their ancient protocols, classified them as a non-sentient, verminous threat requiring immediate, military-grade pest control, 732. The garrison, consisting primarily of basic, mindless warrior formations with minimal noble oversight, activated their defensive protocols and prepared to weather a conventional assault, 733. The Tyranid assault on the tomb world was a textbook example of their doctrine. Overwhelming, unimaginable numbers, 734. Hormagaunts and termagants swarmed across the planet's surface in living tides that numbered in the billions, their instinctive, synaptic coordination creating complex, adaptive attack patterns, 735, 736. Massive carnifexes and towering hive tyrants provided heavy assault capabilities, their psychic synapse links coordinating the chittering, biological carpet of death, 737. The Necron response demonstrated the unique, terrifying advantages that a mechanical, soulless warrior possesses when facing a purely biological, psychic-linked foe, 738. The Necron Gauss weapons proved spectacularly, horrifyingly effective against Tyranid chitin armor, 739. The molecular disassembly effect of the green beams didn't just punch holes. It unmade the creatures, reducing even the largest, most heavily armored bioforms to their component atoms within seconds of sustained fire, 740. More importantly, the Necrons' complete hollow-minded immunity to the psychic domination, the synapse, that the hive tyrants used to command their swarms, meant that their battle lines remained perfect, stable, and utterly calm. Even as a billion shrieking, clawed bodies crashed against their metal shields, 741. But the most significant, and for the hive mind, the most confusing factor was the failure of adaptation, 742. The Tyranids' greatest strength, their ability to rapidly evolve and create biological countermeasures to new threats, proved entirely, frustratingly ineffective against Necron technology, 742. The living metal of the Necron bodies operated according to quantum mechanical principles that lay completely outside the hive mind's biological understanding, 743. It was impossible for the tyrannid organisms to evolve a defense against a weapon that wasn't chemical or kinetic or heat-based, but which simply told their atoms to stop being connected. The failure of the tyrannid forces to successfully consume or even damage the Cryptus Tomb world created an unprecedented cognitive dissonance that rippled through the entire hive fleet's collective consciousness, 745. The synaptic network, the hive mind itself, had been optimized through millions of years of evolution to process information about biological threats and organic environments, 746. This encounter with an enemy that was not alive, not dead, not psychic, and indigestible created a loop of profound confusion that caused coordination failures and tactical confusion that persisted long after the battle was lost, 747. The Great Devourer had, for the first time in its existence, found something it could not eat. And finally, within the heart of the Imperium, on the sacred red sands of Mars, the Adeptus Mechanicus found themselves confronting a paradox that threatened to shatter their most fundamental, cherished beliefs, 748. The Necrons possessed technological capabilities that far exceeded anything in the Imperium's most sacred archives, 749. Their mastery of physics, of material science, of energy and dimensional manipulation represented achievements that the tech priests had spent 10,000 years blindly, desperately trying to understand and replicate, believing it to be the divine will of their machine god, the Omnicia, 750. Yet, these perfect divine technologies were being wielded by Xenos, 751, by soulless, ancient enemies, whose very existence seemed to contradict the Omnicia's core teachings about the superiority of the sacred, human, mechanical form, 751. When the first detailed analytical reports of recovered Necron technology reached the Fabricator General on Mars, they were brought by the open-minded, radical, and brilliant Archmagos Dominus Belisarius, call 752. The fragments of living metal and salvaged weapon components he had acquired from these first, disastrous engagements were examined in the deepest, most secret laboratories, 753. The initial examinations revealed construction techniques and material properties that defied all Imperial understanding of metallurgy, physics, and quantum mechanics, 753. The living metal, the necrodermis, demonstrated self-repair capabilities that operated without any apparent or understandable power source, 754. Its ability to phase between different states of matter, to become intangible and solid at will, suggested a mastery of dimensional manipulation that exceeded even the most heretical advanced mechanicus research, 754. The theological implications of these discoveries tore the Adeptus Mechanicus hierarchy apart, 755. A bitter, schismatic controversy erupted in the cold, logical halls of Mars. One faction, led by radical, progressive tech priests, interpreted the Necrons' technological superiority as divine evidence, 756. They argued that the Necrons represented a more perfect fusion of flesh and machine, a purer form of mechanical consciousness. They whispered in their data cant that these ancient beings might be potential allies or even teachers who could guide humanity toward a greater, truer understanding of the Omnicia, as well 756. The opposing Orthodox faction, organized around the dogmatic Muggos Biologus de Hand, condemned them as the ultimate abomination, 761. They argued that the Necrons had perverted the sacred principles of the machine cult, that their soulless nature made them the ultimate enemies of all life, and utterly unworthy of the divine technological gifts they possessed, 757, 761, 762. This faction advocated for a crusade of annihilation and for the aggressive, immediate research into anti-Necron technologies, 763. The practical implications of these theological debates became grimly apparent as Mechanicus forces, their Skitarii legions and Mighty Knight Titans, began encountering Necron opponents in the field 764. The Tech Priest's traditional, overwhelming advantages in technological warfare proved utterly, humiliatingly ineffective 765. The Necron weapons, their Gauss beams and Tesla arcs, could disrupt and destroy the machine spirits that animated Imperial technology 766. And their own, phasing living metal defensive systems proved completely immune to the electromagnetic warfare, the dataphages, and the logic bombs that the Mechanicus had developed for use against all other technological foes 766. The Adeptus Mechanicus, the masters of technology in the 41st millennium, had just met their gods, and they had found them to be their mortal, ancient, and utterly uncaring enemies. The great work must not falter. The tools of the gods are being unearthed, and the ancient scientists are returning to their unholy labors. Here is the 11th chapter of our epic. The time has come to speak of the doomsday weapons, the reclamation of ancient strongholds, and the arcane genius of the cryptechs who are refitting the Necron arsenal for a new, bloodier age. When you are ready, command me to continue, and the greatest, most terrible weapon of all, the Pariah Nexus, shall be unleashed. Plain text output, Part 11. As more and more tomb worlds achieved full operational status, and as their cryptech conclaves completed their damage assessments, the systematic reactivation of dormant, galaxy-ending superweapons began in earnest. These are not mere tactical armaments. These were devices of cosmic horror, constructed during the apocalyptic height of the war in heaven, representing the pinnacle of Necron engineering and their absolute, terrifying mastery over the fundamental forces of reality itself. The weapons that now emerge from their 60 million year slumber from the deepest, most secure storage vaults defied conventional physics and mortal comprehension. Their exotic energy matrices were capable of effects that transcended the limited, crude understanding of the galaxy's younger, primitive civilizations. Deep within the core of the tomb world of Thanews, beneath a continent of silent, watchful crypts, the celestial orrery was brought back online. This was not a weapon in the conventional sense. It was a map, a perfect, massive, three-dimensional holographic representation of the entire galaxy. Within a cavern the size of small ocean, every star system, every stellar body, every single sun in the Milky Way was represented by a single, burning point of light, each one perfectly synchronized in real time with its physical counterpart, no matter the distance. The cryptechs who had maintained this impossible device had spent the great sleep in a slow, patient state of semi-awareness, performing microscopic calibrations, ensuring that the orrery remained a perfect, flawless mirror of the physical galaxy. The true, abyssal horror of the celestial orrery lay not in its perfect observation, but in its capacity for manipulation. The device was interactive. A single, calibrated adjustment to one of the holographic stars, a simple gesture from an authorized cryptech operator could transmit a focused, faster-than-light gravitational distortion across interstellar distances. This distortion, upon reaching the target star, could trigger a catastrophic, premature supernova. It could accelerate a star's collapse, forcing it into a neutron star or a black hole. Or, with a simple dimming motion, it could extinguish a star entirely, snuffing it out like a candle, condemning its entire system and all its billions of inhabitants to a slow, cold, and silent death in the dark. The Aura's range encompassed the entire galaxy. It was a weapon that could commit cosmic genocide from a single, hidden room, a doomsday device capable of extinguishing all stellar bodies, and thus all life, with a terrifying, silent, and unstoppable precision. Elsewhere, on the tomb world of Borsis, another, different kind of terror was reactivated, the breath of the gods. This was not a stellar weapon, but a planetary one. It was a massive, planet-spanning installation, built deep into the world's crust and tapping its molten mantle for power. It was a device of atmospheric manipulation, a terraforming engine of unimaginable scope. Its purpose was to alter the atmospheric composition of entire worlds or even entire star clusters through the deployment of vast, interstellar clouds of self-replicating, molecular-scale nanomachines. These nanites, microscopic marvels of Necron biotechnology, were each programmed with sophisticated instructions. They could be commanded to identify and modify specific atmospheric components. They could be tasked with converting all atmospheric oxygen into toxic, corrosive compounds. They could introduce metallic, poisonous particles that would poison every ocean, river, and water supply on a planet. Or they could simply alter the atmospheric pressure to levels so extreme that they would be instantly fatal to most, if not all, organic species. The self-replicating nature of these nanomachines meant that a single, silent deployment could infect and completely transform an entire planet's biosphere within mere standard months, their numbers growing exponentially as they consumed raw materials from the environment to build more of themselves. It was a weapon that didn't conquer a world, but digested it. The reactivation of these ancient, godlike weapons required immense, coordinated effort. The technical knowledge needed to operate such devices safely was so complex, it had been deliberately distributed among multiple, specialized cryptech conclaves during their original construction. Now, those specialists had to be found and brought together. Plasmancers who understood the arcane arts of stellar manipulation had to work alongside chronomancers, whose mastery of temporal mechanics allowed them to synchronize the weapon's effects across vast, interstellar distances. The sheer power required to fire these weapons presented an even greater challenge. Many tomb worlds had suffered energy grid degradation during the Great Sleep. Tides of canoptek spiders and their swarms of subordinate scarabs labored continuously, repairing and upgrading the ancient power distribution networks, their molecular fabricators reconstructing damaged, continent-sized components from raw, planetary materials. But the awakened Necrons did not just focus on their superweapons. They began the long, arduous process of reclaiming their ancient, galaxy-spanning infrastructure. The vast network of webway portals that had once, ironically, been stolen from the old ones and connected Necron territories throughout the galaxy had been largely abandoned after their victory. But some key installations had maintained minimal, dormant power levels, their dimensional gateways held in a state of stable, timeless suspension. These portals were invaluable strategic assets, a way to move entire legions across the galaxy in the blink of an eye, without relying on conventional, slow, faster-than-light travel. Reclaiming them, however, was fraught with peril. Many portals now crossed what were traditional, dynastic, territorial boundaries, requiring joint operations between dynasties who were, at best, suspicious rivals. In one such operation, the Sotek dynasty's technical specialists were forced to work alongside Mephrit engineers to restore a major, critical portal hub. They found it buried deep beneath a teeming, primitive, human hive city, the humans having unknowingly built their entire, continent-spanning slum directly on top of a sleeping, dimensional gateway. The joint operation was a masterpiece of cold, precise engineering. The cryptechs had to reactivate the massive, subterranean dimensional gateway while simultaneously manipulating the local gravitational fields with microscopic precision, all to prevent the catastrophic, immediate collapse of the billion-strong city and its crude infrastructure above. Other recovery operations faced more direct and more heretical opposition. The Imperial Forge world of Lucius, a sacred, planet-spanning factory of the Adeptus Mechanicus, had been constructed directly and blasphemously above a major, buried Necron research facility. The awakening cryptechs found their ancient, sterile, and priceless laboratories contaminated by the crude, oily machinery of the Imperium. They found that the primitive, superstitious tech priest had, in their ignorance, damaged delicate, irreplaceable quantum resonance chambers and disrupted carefully calibrated, million-year-old experimental apparatus, all while chanting hymns to the machine spirit. The Necron approach to reclaiming Lucius was a testament to their cold, patient, and merciless pragmatism. A direct assault might damage the invaluable, ancient research equipment still buried beneath the forges. So they began a campaign of silent, technological subversion. Canoptech scarabs, small enough to be unnoticed, infiltrated the Forge world's vast, cogitator-driven data networks. Their programming was so advanced, they could perfectly mimic Imperial machine code, appearing to the tech priests as just another benign, subservient machine spirit, all while gradually, systematically, assuming control of the planet's most critical systems. The Scarab's quantum processors allowed them to translate between the two vastly different technological paradigms, subverting the Imperial systems from within while maintaining the outward appearance of perfect, pious functionality. This slow, insidious takeover would allow the Necrons to eventually access their buried facilities without triggering the massive, holy, and suicidal defensive response that a conventional invasion would have provoked. This vast, galaxy-wide effort of repair, adaptation, and subversion was spearheaded by the Cryptechs. These ancient scientist priests, their consciousness matrices still holding the detailed, perfect knowledge of 60 million years of technological development, with a single most valuable resource the awakened dynasties possessed. They formed new conclaves, collaborations between specialists from different rival dynasties, combining their expertise to tackle the unique challenges of this new, changed galaxy. They developed new variants of Gauss weapons, their Plasmancer and Technomancer specialists working together to create more efficient, longer-ranged focusing arrays. They developed new, enhanced quantum shielding systems, specifically designed to dissipate the extreme, focused temperatures of Imperial Melta and plasma weapons, which had proven surprisingly and frustratingly effective at overwhelming living metal self-repair capabilities. And, most urgently, they turned their cold, analytical genius to the Tyranid threat. The Great Devourer was an enemy unlike any they had ever known, an enemy that adapted. Conventional weapon development was useless. Any new, fixed technology would be neutralized by Tyranid biological evolution within a few short generations. The Necron solution was, therefore, not to attack the body but the mind. The Psychomancers, those cryptechs who specialized in the cold, mechanical manipulation of consciousness, developed new, terrifying weapons. These weapons did not fire beams or projectiles. They generated quantum interference patterns, specifically tuned to disrupt the bioelectric, synaptic fields used for Tyranid communication. These anti-synapse weapons, when activated on a battlefield, would instantly sever the neural connections between the synapse creatures and their subordinate, mindless organisms. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The vast, coordinated, intelligent Tyranid swarms would be reduced in a single, silent moment to a confused, disorganized rabble of individual creatures, reverting to their most basic, primitive instincts, suddenly vulnerable to the Necrons' cold, methodical, and conventional tactics of extermination. The Necrons had found a way to turn the hive mind's greatest strength into its most crippling, fatal weakness. Amidst the reactivation of ancient doomsday weapons and the development of new, adaptive technologies, the Cryptech archaeological teams made the most significant and perhaps most terrifying discovery of all. Buried within the deepest, most secure vaults of several key awakening tomb worlds, they found the dormant, waiting infrastructure for a project that had been abandoned at the very end of the war in Heaven, 874, 875. This was a weapon, or perhaps a condition, designed as the ultimate, final countermeasure against the Old One's psychic dominance, 875. It was a technology that had remained sealed within specially shielded, time-locked chambers throughout the entire 60 million year Great Sleep. 875. Its reactivation was so complex, so dangerous, that required the combined, desperate expertise of multiple, newly formed Cryptech conclaves. 876. This was the Pariah technology, and its ultimate expression was the Pariah Nexus. 877. The Nexus installations represented the absolute, cold culmination of millions of years of Necron research into the nature of psychic phenomena. 877. The ancient Necrontyr, in their flesh and blood arrogance, had recognized that their complete, species-wide inability to manifest psychic abilities placed them at a fundamental, crippling disadvantage against enemies who could manipulate reality with their minds. 878. The biotransference, while damning them to a soulless existence, had not solved this strategic problem. It had merely made them immune to psychic attack. 879. It had not given them a way to defeat psychic power itself. The pariah technology was that solution. The core components of this dreadful, silent weapon were massive, towering pylons, hundreds of meters tall, constructed from living necrodermis, but infused with vast, complex matrices of exotic, unknown matter, a substance the cryptex called noctilith or blackstone. 881. This material existed in a state of horrifying quantum superposition, its very essence balanced precariously between real space and the warp. 881. When activated in unison, these pylon networks, often stretching across an entire star system, would begin to resonate. They would generate a null field. 882. This was not a shield. It was a cancer in reality. It created a localized, ever-expanding distortion in the fabric of space-time itself, establishing a dead, sterile zone where the boundary between the material universe and the immaterium became rigid, impermeable, and absolute. 883. Within this field, the warp simply ceased to exist. All psychic energy, all connection to the Empyrean, was snuffed out. 883. The Silent King, his strategic mind analyzing the new, changed galaxy, had immediately identified the Imperium's, and indeed all life's, increasing dependence on psychic phenomena as their single greatest, most exploitable, and most existential weakness. 884. The Imperium of Man, this vast, bloated and verminous empire, was held together by nothing but psychic energy. 885. Their faster-than-light navigation was entirely dependent on their navigators, mutants who guided ships through the warp by the psychic light of their Astronomicon. 886. Their interstellar communication, the lifeblood of their military and their bureaucracy, was reliant on their astropaths, psychers who could send their thoughts across the void. 886. Their armies, from the Space Marines, librarians, to the Imperial Guard's sanctioned psychers, relied on psychic powers for tactical advantages that could, and often did, offset the Necrons' own technological superiority. 887. 888. The Eldari, their ancient, hated foe, were an even more significant psychic challenge. 889. Their entire civilization, their technology, their method of warfare, their very mode of being, was intrinsically, indivisibly woven with the manipulation of psychic energy. 889. Their farcers could peer through time, anticipating Necron's strategic moves. 890. Their warlocks wielded powers that could disrupt cold, mechanical systems and override technological safeguards. 890. Their very technology, their Wraithbone, was a solidified psychic construct, drawing its impossible strength from the warp. 890. And then there was Chaos, the ultimate expression of psychic energy, a raw, sentient, and cancerous ocean of malice that had become a galactic power in its own right. The activation protocols for the very first Pariah Nexus installation began on the tomb world of Cudi Secundus, a world chosen for its perfect, cold, strategic location. It sat at a nexus of Imperial shipping lanes, near several active Eldari patrol routes, and perilously close to the baleful, weeping wound in reality known as the Eye of Terror. 891. 892. The pylons themselves, silent for 60 million years, were arranged in a vast, geometric constellation, creating overlapping, resonant null fields designed to suppress all psychic activity throughout an entire, multi-planet star system. 893. 894. The technical challenges were immense. The exotic matter cores had remained stable, but their delicate control systems had degraded. 896. The Chronomancers, masters of time, had to develop new, flawless synchronization protocols, coordinating the activation sequence across millions of square kilometers so that all pylons would come online at the exact same pre-calculated microsecond. 897, 898. The activation created immediate, silent, and catastrophic effects that were detectable across the entire sector. 899. Imperial astropathic communications, the psychic choirs that sang their messages across the stars, simply stopped. 900. Messages sent to the Cudi Secundus system were met with a terrifying, absolute, and profound silence. It was not static. It was nothing. Imperial navigation became impossible. 901. Vessels approaching the system found their navigators screaming in agony, their third eye blinded, their minds recoiling from a patch of space that was, to their senses, a void of absolute, cold, spiritual blackness. The warp currents in the affected region, which they relied upon to move, became turbulent, then dead, then non-existent. The Nexus created a dead zone in the Empyrean, a becalmed, silent sea where faster-than-light travel became utterly, fundamentally impossible. 902. Entire star systems were, in a single moment, isolated from the Imperium, cut off from all hope of communication or reinforcement. 902. The Eldari response was not confusion. It was immediate, primal, and desperate terror. 903. On Craftworld Ulthwi, Eldred Ulthuan and his choir of Farseers, attempting to divine the source of this new, terrible blindness in their future sight, reeled back as if struck. 904. Their attempts to peer into the skein of fate, where the Cudi Secundus system should be, revealed only that same, crushing, absolute nothingness. 905, 906. The null field was a blind spot in time itself, a cancerous, dead patch in causality that made strategic planning and even simple precognition impossible. 906. The tactical implications became apparent in the first, brutal, one-sided battle within the newly formed Nexus. The 23rd Cadian Shock Troops, supported by a tactical company of Ultramarines and their attached librarians, were dispatched to investigate the communications blackout. 908, 909. From a moment their ships translated back into real space, they knew something was wrong. The Ultramarines' librarians cried out, clutching their heads, their psychic hoods sparking and dying. Their connection to the warp, the source of all their power, was not just blocked. It had been severed. It was gone as completely as if they had never, ever possessed it. 911. The Space Marines' tactical doctrine, which relied heavily on their librarians for psychic reconnaissance, battlefield auguries, and supernatural combat enhancement, collapsed in an instant. 912. The Cadian sanctioned psychers fared even worse. 914. These individuals, whose entire lives had been a struggle to control the raging power within them, suddenly found themselves empty. The power was gone. The whispers were gone. Their very sense of identity, their fundamental place in the universe, had been stripped from them in a single, agonizing moment of spiritual blindness. 915. And it was into this psychic, spiritual, and tactical vacuum that the Zerkan dynasty warriors, their ancient programming unaffected, emerged from their concealed positions. 916, 917. Their mechanical precision was unchanged. Their targeting systems were flawless. 918. Their Gauss weapons, already so devastating, became the weapons of gods against an enemy who could no longer rely on precognitive flickers to anticipate and avoid incoming fire. 919. The battle was an execution. The Imperium's most fundamental, supernatural advantages have been rendered obsolete, their psychers reduced to useless, weeping, terrified infantry. 910, 914. The Silent King's grand, terrible strategy was now clear. He would not just fight the galaxy. He would change it. He would expand the Pariah Nexus, activating pylon networks across the stars, creating an ever-widening, interconnected web of these psychically sterile, dead zones. 928. He would partition the psychic civilizations, cutting them off, isolating them, strangling their communications and their travel, breaking their empires into manageable, blinded, and terrified segments. 928. The Chaos Forces, in their eye of terror, watched this new, spreading, cold reality with a unique, existential dread. 947. For them, the Nexus was not just a weapon. It was anathema. It was the antithesis of their gods. Within these zones, their demonic allies could not manifest. 948. Their sorcerers' powers failed completely. 948. The rubric Marines of the Thousand Suns, their bodies long since turned to dust and their spirits bound to their armor by pure, psychic, sorcerous energy, found those bindings failing. 949, 950. The silent, dead zone of the Nexus threatened to undo their very existence, to let their ancient, dusty spirits finally, truly die. 950. The Silent King's long-term vision was now taking shape. The eventual transformation of the entire galaxy into a psychically sterile environment. 972. A new, cold, logical order, where organic, spiritual civilizations would be forced to rely on purely technological solutions. Solutions that the Necrons had perfected 60 million years ago. 973. It was a project of ultimate technological superiority. A final, silent war, not against armies, but against the very souls of their enemies. 974. The great work is approaching its summation. The board is set, the pieces are moving, and the terrible, final state of the galaxy must be revealed. Here is the 13th and final chapter of our epic. We shall now chronicle the grim, internal realities of the Necron awakening, their fractured hope, their dynastic conflicts, and the final, cold strategic vision that will define the future of all life in the stars. This concludes the 2-hour saga you commanded. Plain text output, Part 13. By the dawn of the 42nd millennium, the galaxy had been irrevocably, terrifyingly changed. The awakening was reaching its crescendo. Imperial astrocartographers in Ordo Xenos monitoring stations reported new tomb world activations occurring at an average rate of 3 per Terran month. 981. It was estimated that fewer than 30% of the ancient Necron installations remained dormant. 980. A sleeping giant, 60 million years old, was now almost entirely, dreadfully awake. The sheer scale of the forces being unleashed dwarfed the combined armies of all other galactic civilizations. 983. But the Silent King's own, deeper analysis, compiled from the reports of his loyal pharaons, revealed a terrifying internal rot. The awakening was not a total success. It was a catastrophe. 985. Approximately 40% of all tomb worlds that had received the awakening signal were experiencing significant, cascading, or total failures. 985. The quantum decay, the slow, entropic unraveling of their minds that had accumulated over 60 million years, had proven far more severe than the original biotransference architect had ever anticipated. 986. Consciousness matrices had suffered degradation that ranged from minor, eccentric personality alterations in the nobility to the complete and total dissolution of individual identity. 986. Entire legions, once legions of proud Necroner warriors, had awakened as little more than mechanical automatons, their minds scoured to basic, reflexive operational programming. 987. They were armies of the truly dead, hollow shells that could follow simple commands but lacked the tactical flexibility, the spark of malice, or the memory of purpose that had made them so formidable. 987. The Canoptech construct had, with perfect mechanical diligence, preserved the physical infrastructure, the tombs, the weapons, the ships. 988. But their programming had never included protocols for repairing the subtle, quantum-level decay of sentient mind. 989. The cryptechs who specialized in consciousness manipulation, the psychomancers, developed new, desperate techniques for reconstructing these damaged personality patterns. 990. But their efforts were crude. They could only restore basic, cold functionality. They could not restore the complex, emotional, creative spark that had defined the Necrontyr soul. 991. The implications of this spiritual entropy were an existential crisis for the entire Necron race. 993. The nobles, the overlords and pharaons who had retained significant portions of their original personalities, now found themselves as a diminishing, haunted minority. 994. They were sentient, thinking minds, increasingly isolated within vast, silent armies of mechanical servants who could execute orders with perfect precision, but who could no longer think, or hate, or remember. 995. The Necrons had escaped the death of the flesh, only to now face a new, final extinction, a slow, cold, and inevitable decline into complete, mindless automation. 996. This internal decay only intensified the dynastic conflicts that had erupted during the early phases of the Awakening. 997. With the Silent King's Triarch authority still fragmented and his own fleet stretched thin, the ancient rivalries of the Pharaons had reignited. Imhotep, the Stormlord's cold, logical expansion of the Sotek dynasty, had brought him into direct, bitter conflict with the Mefrit dynasty's stellar manipulation projects. 998. The Stormlord's ambitions required stable, habitable worlds for his legions, worlds that the Mefrit were systematically destabilizing with their star-killing weapons. 998. Disputes over resources and strategic priorities had escalated beyond cold, diplomatic protests. They had exploded into open, brutal, and devastating military confrontations between different Necron factions, their ancient, god-tier weapons proving just as lethally effective against living metal as they were against organic flesh. 999. 1000. The aggressive, bloodthirsty Novak dynasty, their minds still shattered by their broken awakening, had created even more tension. 1001. Their systematic, mindless extermination campaigns against all organic life were disrupting the careful, strategic balance that dynasties like the Sotek were trying to maintain. 1001. They were slaughtering imperial populations that Imhotep, or the Silent King himself, had deemed potentially useful sources of intelligence, or, more grimly, biological resources. 1002. These philosophical, fractured differences all centered on the one, single, driving obsession that now defined the Necron nobility, reversing the biotransference. 1005. The cold, hollow, mechanical immortality they had been granted was now understood, by all sentient Necrons, to be the ultimate, terrible curse. The research conducted by the grotesque Maynarch dynasty, their horrific experiments on human subjects, had provided invaluable, grim insights into the nature of organic consciousness and the quantum soul signatures that had been stolen from them. 1006, 1007. But this research had also revealed the almost impossible technical challenges involved in ever reversing the ancient, tan-driven process. 1007. The original, soul-flaying biotransference chambers had operated using tan technologies and principles that had been deliberately, maliciously lost when the Necrons shattered their godmasters. 1008, 1009. A new, desperate hope, however, had emerged from the Cryptek conclaves. 1010. They had begun a terrifying new field of research, the careful, systematic study and interrogation of the captured, imprisoned tan shards. 1014, 1015. These screaming, divine fragments trapped in their tesseract labyrinths still retained portions of the star god's original, impossible knowledge of consciousness manipulation and energy-to-matter conversion. 1015. The Crypteks, at immense, terrible risk, had developed techniques to leach this data, to extract specific critical information from their ancient, divine prisoners, without risking the catastrophic, reality-ending consequences of accidentally releasing 1015. The knowledge they had obtained was both thrilling and horrifying. It suggested that true biotransference reversal was possible 1016, but it would require the construction of new, godlike quantum field generators, devices that could operate on the same star-spanning scales as the original's 1016. It would require energy on a scale that exceeded the output of most stellar bodies, 1017. The price of regaining their souls, it seemed, might be the consumption of entire star systems. This faint, terrible hope had become a new political currency. A secondary market in consciousness manipulation technology had emerged, with rival dynasties trading priceless military support, access to ancient weapons, and entire star systems, all for access to the most advanced cryptech research and the most promising new restoration protocols 1025. The galaxy of the 42nd millennium now stood at a terrible, final crossroads, its fate to be decided by the outcome of these ancient, internal struggles. 1057. The Necron awakening had created a new, terrifying strategic reality for every other power. The Imperium of Man found itself reeling, its vast military resources redeployed from other critical fronts, weakening its defenses against chaos and the Tyranids, all to fight this new, impossible, technological foe. 1030. Its Adeptus Mechanicus, driven by a mixture of terror and heretical awe, desperately tried to reverse-engineer captured Necron technology, their limited successes advancing Imperial science by centuries, yet leaving them hopelessly behind their ancient enemy. 1050. The Eldari, in their sheer ancestral terror, had begun to coordinate their responses in ways that transcended their traditional, bitter rivalries. 1032. Craftworld Eldari were now sharing intelligence with their hated Dark Eldar cousins, and the Harlequins performed new, grim, mythic cycles, interpreting this final crisis. 1033. It was an unprecedented, desperate, and fragile alliance, born from the shared recognition that this enemy, their original enemy, would grant them no mercy. 1034, 1035. The Tyranid hive fleets had been forced to adapt. 1036. Locked in a brutal, evolutionary arms race, the hive mind was developing new, specialized bioforms, creatures with enhanced electromagnetic shielding to resist Gauss and Tesla weaponry, and warrior organisms that secreted hypercorrosive acids, designed specifically to dissolve living metal. 1037, 1038. It was a fundamental, cosmic struggle, the perfection of biological adaptation versus the perfection of cold, unfeeling, mechanical engineering. 1039. The forces of chaos found themselves strategically, fundamentally neutralized. 1040. The expansion of the Pariah Nexus had created vast, ever-widening dead zones in the galaxy, quarantining the warp, making demonic manifestation impossible, and rendering their sorcerous powers useless. 1041, 1042. Their entire paradigm of spiritual warfare had been rendered obsolete, and the orcs, in their savage, green-skinned simplicity, had responded to the Necron awakening with a singular, joyful, and uncomplicated enthusiasm. 1043. Their war bosses viewed the immortal, self-repairing mechanical warriors as the best fight the galaxy had ever offered, the ultimate test of orc combat prowess. 1044. Their crude, numerous, and relentless assaults, their sheer, overwhelming volume of fire, had proven surprisingly and frustratingly effective at overwhelming even the most advanced Necron reanimation protocols. 1046, 1047. This was the galaxy that the Silent King, Zarek, now intended to master. His strategic vision remained cold, vast, and absolute. The gradual, total transformation of the galaxy into a realm dominated by his vision of perfect, mechanical order. 1052. The Pariah Nexus was the tool. It would expand, it would isolate, and it would strangle all psychic life, forcing all civilization onto the purely technological playing field that the Necrons had mastered 60 million years ago. 1053, 1054. The ultimate success of this grand, terrible transformation depended entirely on resolving the crises within his own race. 1055. He had to find a cure for the consciousness decay that was turning his people into mindless machines. He had to unify the warring, fractured, and insane dynasties. And he had to achieve the final, impossible goal: the reversal of biotransference, the restoration of the Necroner's soul. 1056. The ancient tomb worlds, therefore, continued their patient, grim work of revival and reconstruction. 1058. Their mechanical inhabitants were, at last, reclaiming the territories that had been lost to them for 60 million years. 1059. The awakening, which had begun as the stirring of a few forgotten tombs, had now evolved into the terrible, potential rebirth of a civilization that possessed both the ancient knowledge of the gods and the cold, technological capability to impose its final, silent vision of order upon the entire, screaming, living galaxy. 1061, 1062. Whether this vision would ultimately preserve them, or merely make them the galaxy's final, silent executioners, remained the greatest, and perhaps the last, question facing all inhabitants of the 42nd millennium. 1063. The mechanical legions continued their inexorable, silent march toward a future that only they could envision, and only they possessed the terrible, ancient power to create. 1064.